On the 20th of December 2017, Meghan Markle walked into her first royal Christmas lunch. She was not yet married to Harry. She was not yet a duchess. She was just the American actress who was about to join the most scrutinized family in the world, attending her first major event with the extended royal family at Buckingham Palace. The first person she encountered was wearing a brooch depicting a black figure as a slave. The brooch belonged to Princess Michael of Kent. She was wearing it on her left shoulder as she arrived through the palace gates. Photographers caught it. Social media identified it within hours. Blackamoor jewelry, the style features black figures in subservient or exotic poses, has been considered racially offensive for decades. The brooch featured a black man in a gold headdress and robe. Meghan's mother is black. Meghan was biracial. This was her first public family event. The palace issued an apology the next day. Princess Michael was very sorry and distressed that it had caused offense. The brooch was a gift. She had worn it many times before. Both of those things were apparently true. She had worn it many times before. Which means that nobody, not in 3 decades of royal events, not across 3 reigns, not through hundreds of occasions at Buckingham Palace and Kensington Palace and Windsor Castle, had ever told her to leave it at home. That is the first thing you need to understand about Princess Michael of Kent. She also had 2 black sheep at home in Gloucestershire. She had named them Venus and Serena, after the Williams sisters. That was reported in Vanity Fair in 2018 by Atish Taseer, a journalist who had dated her daughter. He described it as something she did out of what felt like a desire to shock. He noted that most people who knew her thought she was, in his words, perfectly ghastly. He also said she could be funny, intelligent, and generous, and that she was considerably more hard-working than most of the other royals. She called herself our Val. The Queen had called her a Valkyrie on first meeting. The Norse warrior goddess, 6 feet tall, blonde, formidable, arriving fully formed into the British royal family in 1978, as if she had conquered it, rather than married into it. The Queen said it to Lord Mountbatten, "I've just met this Valkyrie." The family started calling her our Val behind her back. Princess Anne had a different name for her, Princess Pushy. Prince Charles had a name for the couple together, the Rent-a-Kents, for their habit, as he put it, of turning up at the opening of an envelope. Viscount Linley, Princess Margaret's son, now the Earl of Snowdon, was once asked what he would wish on his worst enemy. He said, "Dinner with Princess Michael of Kent." The royal family's nicknames for a person tell you everything about how the royal family actually feels about that person. 3 different members of the family. 3 different nicknames. All pointed in the same direction. She was still living in Kensington Palace. Not just at Kensington Palace. In the best apartment at Kensington Palace. 10 rooms. 5 bedrooms. 5 reception rooms. A walled garden she liked to call her open-air drawing room. She had been there since 1981. For years, she and Prince Michael were paying £69 per week in rent. £69 per week. For an apartment in one of the most valuable addresses in London. When Parliament found out in 2002, the House of Commons Public Accounts Committee called for the Queen to evict them and charge market rate. The Queen did not evict them. Instead, it emerged that the Queen had been secretly paying £120,000 per year from her own private funds to cover the market rent on their behalf. She was untouchable. Not because she was powerful, not because she had any formal royal role, not because anyone particularly liked her, but because the mechanism for removing her simply did not exist in the specific form that the British royal family's machinery operates, and because the alternative, the public confrontation, the formal exclusion, the scene, was worse than the ongoing management. And so the courtiers managed her, for 3 reigns, through the SS Father and the affair, and the Diana comments, and the restaurant in New York, and the apartment, and the brooch, and the sheep, and Prince Michael's Kremlin sting. They managed her. She remained. This is the account of how that happened, why it happened, and what it cost the people who had to keep absorbing it. If you are enjoying this story, hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you are watching from. She was born on the 15th of January 1945 in Karlovy Vary. At the time, It was called Carlsbad. At the time, it was part of Nazi-occupied Czechoslovakia. Her father was not there. He was a prisoner of war. Her mother had just been released from a Nazi prison camp. She had been arrested for participating in an anti-Nazi demonstration. She came home from prison and gave birth to a daughter. The daughter was Marie Christine Anna Agnes Hedwig Ida von Reibnitz. She would eventually become Princess Michael of Kent. That is quite a beginning. The father, Baron Gunther von Reibnitz, had joined the Nazi Party in 1930. He served in the SS Cavalry Corps. He held the rank of Ortsgruppenleiter. In 1944, the Nazi Party itself dismissed him for what they described as perceived disloyalty. When the war ended, a Bavarian denazification court tried him in 1947 and classified him as a lesser offender. He appealed. They reclassified him as a mere follower. The mother, Countess Maria Anna Schapari, was the opposite. She had protested the Nazis. They had imprisoned her for it. She was released. She gave birth. And when it became clear that her husband's first marriage had never actually been annulled, which meant their own marriage was invalid under Catholic law, she took the children and left. She moved them to Australia. Marie Christine grew up moving. Bohemia, Bavaria, Australia, Mozambique, Vienna, London. 6 countries before she found the one she decided to stay in. She was not the product of a settled aristocratic formation. She was the product of displacement, the specific experience of the person who has been moved around enough times to understand that the available world is not organized around their comfort. That understanding produces 2 types of people. The first type adapts. They become chameleons, excellent at reading the room, at fitting in, at making themselves acceptable to whatever world they find themselves in. The second type decides that the world should adapt to them instead. They become formidable. Marie Christine became the second type. In London, she studied the history of fine and decorative art at the Victoria and Albert Museum. She became an interior designer. She wrote books. She gave lectures. She presented herself as the specific type of the European aristocrat whose credentials are carried in the bones, the countess's daughter, the baron's daughter, the woman who has actual royal blood coursing through her veins, and who is therefore not terribly impressed by the British royal family's claims to grandeur. This last part is important. She genuinely believed she was more royal than the Windsors, not in secret, out loud, to people. Royal biographer Katie Nicholl confirmed this. The royals joke that she thinks herself more royal than the House of Windsor. It was not entirely a joke. She said things like, "I live in the 18th century in my mind." She said things like, "The English distrust foreigners. They think the wogs begin at Calais." She said these things to actual people, who then told other people. She was not subtle. Before Prince Michael, there was Thomas Trowbridge. She married him in 1971. She was 26. He was a baronet. The marriage lasted 7 years and produced no children. It was annulled in 1978, which is relevant because she was Catholic, and Catholics do not divorce. They annul, which is a different process, requiring a finding that the marriage was invalid from the start. The annulment mattered. Without it, she could not remarry in the church. And she needed to remarry in the church because the man she wanted to marry next was the Queen's first cousin. Prince Michael of Kent was born on the 4th of July 1942. He was the younger son of Prince George, Duke of Kent, who died in a wartime plane crash in 1942, 4 months after Michael was born, and Princess Marina of Greece and Denmark. He was the late Queen's first cousin. He looked remarkably like Tsar Nicholas II, which was not a coincidence. His mother Marina was related to the Romanovs. He was quiet, intelligent, and somewhat overlooked in the royal hierarchy. He had a military career, the British Army, the 11th Hussars, retiring as a major in 1981. He spoke several languages, with a particular flair for Russian. He ran his own management consultancy. He was, in the specific terms of the minor royals' available profile, a perfectly respectable background figure. Then he met Marie Christine. They had a 5-year courtship. She was striking, 6 feet tall, blonde, with the specific presence of the person who walks into rooms expecting to be noticed, and generally is. She had opinions. She had credentials. She had the kind of formidable European aristocratic bearing that made the average British royal look slightly underdressed by comparison. There was a problem. She was Catholic. In 1978, under the Act of Settlement of 1701, a member of the royal family, who married a Catholic, was removed from the line of succession. Prince Michael was 13th in line when they got together. He had to choose between her and his succession rights. He chose her. He dropped out of the succession. The Queen gave her blessing, reluctantly. She could not marry in a Catholic church because the Church of England did not recognize Catholic ceremonies, and so the wedding on the 30th of June 1978 was a civil ceremony in Vienna. No church, no archbishop, a Vienna town hall. This was not the wedding she wanted. The Queen met her. Her reaction has been recorded. She said, in private, to Lord Mountbatten, "I've just met this Valkyrie. The Valkyrie is the Norse warrior goddess, the figure who rides into battle, who chooses who lives and who dies, who is formidable and fierce and somewhat terrifying." The Queen did not say this as a compliment. She said it as an observation. The family started calling her Our Val. The name stuck. It stuck because it was accurate. What she wanted from the marriage was what she had always wanted: a settled place in the world, a home, a title, an identity that would not require her to keep moving. She had moved from Bohemia to Bavaria to Australia to Mozambique to Vienna to London. She was done moving. She had found the British royal family and she had married into it, and she was going to be a princess now. She was going to be more than a princess. She was going to be the best princess available. She threw herself into the role with the energy of the person who has found the thing they have been moving toward, and who is not going to let anyone take it from them. She studied royal protocol. She mastered the ceremonial requirements. She wrote books about European royalty, 3 of them, all serious, all well-researched, with actual historical credibility. She gave lectures around the world. She did more charitable and public work than most of the senior royals who were technically outranking her. She also did it louder than anyone else. The volume was the problem, not the work. Nobody disputed the work. The volume. The specific quality of the 6-foot Valkyrie who has decided she is going to be the most royal person in the room and who is going to make sure everyone in the room is aware of this. The Queen was more royal than Princess Michael. Princess Anne was more royal than Princess Michael. The Queen Mother was more royal than Princess Michael. Princess Diana was, at least constitutionally, more royal than Princess Michael. None of them sounded like it as much as Princess Michael did. Princess Anne had been managing the specific quality of Princess Michael's volume since the early 1980s. At some point in that decade, she gave her the nickname, Princess Pushy. It was the nickname that the coverage describes as having been coined by Princess Anne, though some accounts attribute it to Viscount Linley, and the Dickie Arbiter account from the Channel 5 documentary is unambiguous. She is very assertive, so Princess Anne nicknamed her Princess Pushy. The assertive and the pushy are the same quality seen from 2 different positions. From the inside of the person being assertive, it is confidence. From the outside of the person receiving the assertiveness, it is pushy. Princess Anne, who had her own reputation for directness, her own nickname was her royal rudeness, had identified in Princess Michael the specific quality that earned the Princess Pushy designation. The specific quality was not complicated. She pushed. She pushed for the better seat and the more prominent position, and the acknowledgement of the royal status that she felt was not being sufficiently acknowledged. She pushed for the access and the invitations and the inclusion in the occasions that the minor royal's position does not automatically generate. She pushed, in other words, for the place in the royal world that the marriage had technically given her, but that the royal world was not rushing to hand over. The royal world was not rushing to hand it over because the royal world had looked at the 6-foot Valkyrie from Nazi-occupied Czechoslovakia with the SS father and the opinions and the volume, and had concluded that handing things over to her was not the natural first impulse, and so she pushed. She was going to be a princess. She was going to be the best princess available. She was going to be more royal than the Windsors if she had to. The Windsors had a different view of this. Prince Michael of Kent gave up his succession rights for her on the 30th of June 1978 in a Vienna town hall. The family called her Our Val, and meant it as a warning. Princess Anne started calling her Princess Pushy. Prince Charles had not yet coined the rent-a-kents. That came later. First came the honeymoon. Then came Kensington Palace. Then came everything else. In 1981, Prince Michael and Princess Michael of Kent moved into Kensington Palace. Apartment 10. 5 bedrooms, 5 reception rooms, a private walled garden. One of the most valuable addresses in Britain. They moved in and they stayed. They are still there. That is 44 years in the same apartment, which is longer than most marriages and longer than most careers, and considerably longer than anyone in the palace's management structure had anticipated when the arrangement was first made. The arrangement was never supposed to be permanent. It rarely is. The royal family's management of the living arrangements of its minor members is the management of the person who is trying to be fair to the family while not committing to anything that might become expensive or complicated. The Kents were given the apartment. The apartment was given with the understanding that they would contribute to the costs. They contributed £69 a week. £69 a week in an apartment worth millions. When Parliament discovered this in 2002, the House of Commons Public Accounts Committee went through the figures and produced the specific number that the specific examination produces when the examination finds the specific number. The reaction was what the reaction to £69 a week in a Kensington Palace apartment tends to be. The committee called for the Queen to evict them. Market rate was demanded. The arrangement, the committee concluded, was not appropriate. The Queen did not evict them. Instead, it emerged that she had been quietly paying £120,000 a year from her own private funds to top up the rent to a commercial rate. She had been doing this without telling anyone. The palace explained it as recognition of the royal engagements and charitable work that Prince and Princess Michael had been carrying out at their own expense. The committee accepted this. The Kents stayed. This is the first visible evidence of the untouchability. Not the brooch, that came later. The apartment. The Queen of England quietly paying £120,000 a year from her personal funds, rather than having the conversation that would have produced the scene that the conversation would have required. The scene was always worse than the cost. That was the specific calculation. What was happening inside Kensington Palace in those early years of the 1980s was the thing that the apartment's long history has been built on, the specific domestic life of a minor royal couple who had no public funding, no official duties, and no particular place in the institutional structure of the working monarchy. They had the apartment, they had the title, they had the style. What they did not have was money. Prince Michael's consultancy business brought in income. His directorships in the city brought in income. Princess Michael's books and lectures brought in income. But the income was the income of the professionally active minor royals, rather than the income of the senior working royals, whose institutional position generates the specific financial provision that the senior working royal position generates. They were not senior working royals. They were the Queen's cousin and his wife. The distinction mattered financially. It shaped everything about how Princess Michael operated. She needed to generate her own income while simultaneously maintaining the specific presentation of the princess, whose presentation was the only credential she had available to generate the income. She needed to look like a princess to be hired as a princess. She needed to be hired as a princess to afford to look like one. This is the specific trap of the unfunded royal. You need the image to monetize the image. You need the money from monetizing the image to maintain the image. The trap produces the rent-a-kents, Charles's phrase for what he observed as the couple's willingness to appear at any occasion that required a royal presence and was willing to pay for it. It also produced the specific behavior that the palace's courtiers were managing from the beginning. The courtiers at Kensington Palace in the early 1980s were managing a complex ecosystem. Diana had arrived in 1981, the year the Kents moved into apartment 10. Charles and Diana were in one part of the palace. The Kents were in another. The palace was simultaneously producing the most famous woman in the world and housing the woman who would call that woman a convenient womb. The convenient womb comment came later, but the specific quality that would eventually produce it was visible from the beginning. Princess Michael had opinions. She had opinions about everyone and everything in the royal family. She shared the opinions. She shared them with people who then shared them with other people. The specific quality of the person who speaks the private assessment out loud is the quality that the palace's courtiers manage with the specific care that the private assessment spoken out loud requires. They managed it. They did not manage it by telling her to stop. There is no evidence in the available record that anyone ever told Princess Michael to stop saying the things she was saying. The managing was the managing of the consequences rather than the prevention of the cause. She said the things. The things landed. The courtiers managed the landing. The landing was sometimes significant. In 1981, the year they moved in, Princess Michael gave an interview. She was building her public profile. She was making herself known in the specific way that the princess who has arrived in the British royal family and who is determined to be noticed makes herself known. The interviews were part of the strategy. The interviews produced the specific problem that the princess who gives interviews produces in the specific world of the royal family's management of its members' public communications. The royal family does not do unmanaged interviews. It does approved content, orchestrated access, managed messages. Princess Michael did interviews. She said things in them. One of the things she said was that she would go anywhere for a free lunch. The quote was widely reported. It became one of the defining quotes of her public image, the aristocratic admission of the specific financial reality of the unfunded royal who is performing the role of the princess, whose role requires the lunch to be provided by someone else. It was funny. It was self-aware. It was also a catastrophic piece of self-description for the person who is trying to be taken seriously as a royal figure rather than as the person who turns up wherever the lunch is free. The courtiers absorbed this. They absorbed the lunch quote. They absorbed the subsequent interviews. They absorbed the dinner party talk. They absorbed the comments about the wogs beginning at Calais. They absorbed the specific quality of the woman who had moved into apartment 10 at Kensington Palace and who was going to tell you exactly what she thought, regardless of the specific consequences for the people who had to manage the telling. She also had affairs, or rather, she had an affair. The man was Ward Hunt, an American millionaire from Texas. The relationship lasted years. It was not a secret in the specific sense that the affairs of the royal family are secrets, known to everyone in the relevant social world, and not discussed in the press, because the press was not in the business of discussing such things in the 1980s, in the way it would later become. Ward Hunt was in her life. He was in her social world. He was in the rooms at Kensington Palace, and at the country house at Nether Lypiat Manor in Gloucestershire, and at the various occasions of the life that the Kents were conducting in the specific financial and social world of the unfunded royals who were generating their income and their profile from the royal credential. Prince Michael knew, or Prince Michael did not know in the specific form of the person who has decided not to know in order to continue the arrangement that the marriage represents. The arrangement was the arrangement. The Ward Hunt relationship was conducted in the specific parallel form that the relationships of the prominent person in the prominent position conduct themselves in the available parallel form. The courtiers knew. The courtiers managed. The press did not report. The arrangement continued. What the Ward Hunt affair tells about Princess Michael is the specific thing it tells about the person who conducts the affair in the available parallel form for years without producing the scene that the affair produces when the person conducting it is not the person who has calculated that the available parallel form is the available form. She had calculated. She was conducting. The Kents remained at Kensington Palace. The Ward Hunt relationship remained in the parallel form. There was also the country house, Nether Lypiat Manor in Gloucestershire, a 17th century property that the Kents had bought in 1981, the year they moved into apartment 10. The manor was the country life. The apartment was the London life. The black sheep were at the manor. Venus and Serena were not there yet. The sheep came later. But the manor was the property where the specific life of the princess, who had decided she was going to live in the 18th century, in her mind, was being lived in the 17th century house in Gloucestershire. The manor required money to maintain. The apartment required money to maintain. The books and the lectures and the consultancy and the directorships and the appearances at the opening of the envelope generated the money. The cycle continued. Princess Michael was, by all the accounts that have not been organized around dismissing her, genuinely hard-working. Atish Taseer, the journalist who dated her daughter and who knew the family from the inside, said she was a lot more industrious than the other royals. The industriousness was real. The industriousness was also the industriousness of the person who had no choice but to be industrious, because the alternative to industriousness was the specific financial reality of the unfunded royal in the apartment they can't actually afford. She wrote, she lectured, she designed interiors, she appeared, she pushed. She also, from the early 1980s onward, existed in the specific proximity to Diana that the Kensington Palace apartment created. Diana was in the palace. Princess Michael was in the palace. The 6-foot Valkyrie from Nazi-occupied Czechoslovakia, who thought she was more royal than the Windsors, was living in the same building as the woman who had become the most famous royal in the world. That specific proximity was going to produce something. In 1985, the Daily Mirror published a story about Princess Michael of Kent's father. Baron Günther von Reibnitz, it reported, had been a member of the SS. The SS, the Schutzstaffel, was not the regular German army. This distinction matters. The Wehrmacht was the regular army. Millions of Germans served in the Wehrmacht. Many of them had no choice. The SS was different. The SS was the Nazi elite, the ideological core of the regime, the organization that ran the concentration camps, the organization that carried out the mass murders, the organization whose membership required specific ideological commitment to National Socialism, rather than simply the accident of being a German man of military age in the 1940s. You did not accidentally join the SS. Günther von Reibnitz joined the Nazi Party in 1930. He joined the SS Cavalry Corps. He served for 11 years. He held the rank of Ortsgruppenleiter, a local party group leader, a position of organizational authority within the Nazi structure. In 1944, the Nazi Party itself dismissed him for what they recorded as perceived disloyalty. The SS dismissed him. The organization that ran the Holocaust dismissed him for insufficient commitment. He died in 1983, 2 years before the story broke. He never had to answer for it publicly. His daughter did. Buckingham Palace's response on the day the Mirror published was the specific response of the institution that has been caught by a story it was not prepared for, and that is managing the story in real time without a prepared position. Michael Shea, the Queen's press secretary, gave 2 statements in quick succession. The first said that Princess Michael had confirmed it was true that her father was a member of the SS. The second said it had come as a total surprise to her when she heard the news, and a total shock. Both statements were given within minutes of each other, by the same spokesman. To the same press, her father was a member of the SS. Total surprise, total shock. The specific problem with both statements being true simultaneously is the specific problem of the person who can confirm the thing immediately, while simultaneously claiming they had no idea the thing was true. If it was a total surprise, how did she know enough about his record to confirm it within minutes? If she knew enough to confirm it, in what sense was it a total surprise? The palace never resolved this contradiction. It did not try to. A few days later, Princess Michael made an announcement. She would produce a document, she said, proving that her father had been merely a minor Nazi official. The document would demonstrate that the SS membership had been insignificant. The SS rank had been minor. The involvement had been peripheral. The document was never produced. What she was attempting to establish was a distinction that the historical record does not support. The SS was the SS. The Ortsgruppenleiter rank was a position of organizational authority within the party structure. The 11 years of membership was 11 years. The Nazi Party dismissal in 1944, for perceived disloyalty, was the dismissal by the specific organization from which dismissal for insufficient commitment was its own category of information. The public received this story in the specific way that 1985 Britain received the story of a member of the royal family whose father had been in the SS, which is to say, with considerable attention, considerable coverage, and the specific quality of the discomfort that the story of the Nazi connection in the British royal family produces in the British public. The coverage was extensive. The questions were asked. The palace managed the questions with the specific tools available to it in 1985, the press secretary's statements, the promise of the document, the gradual quieting of the story through the passage of time, and the absence of further revelations. She survived it. This is the specific thing about the father story that the account of Princess Michael's untouchability requires to examine. She survived it. The father had been in the SS. The story had been published by the Daily Mirror. The contradiction between the total surprise and the immediate confirmation had been noted. The promised document had not been produced, and she survived it. She survived it for three specific reasons. The first was the timing. Her father had died in 1983, 2 years before the story. He was not available to be interviewed, to be confronted, to add further detail. The story had an end point built into it. The man at the center of it was gone. The second was the Cold War context. 1985 Britain was not the Britain of the post-Nuremberg educational reckoning about SS membership and its specific meaning. It was closer to the war in the specific cultural sense of the living memory. There were people alive in 1985 who had fought in the war, who had lived through it, who understood its complexity in the way that the people who lived through complexity understand it. The public was not uniformly inclined to treat every German connection to the Nazi structure as equivalent to the most direct participation in atrocities. Context mattered. The context was provided. The third reason was the most important. She was already in the family. The marriage had happened in 1978. The children had been born, Frederick in 1979, Gabriella in 1981. The Prince Michael connection was established. The Kensington Palace apartment was occupied. Removing her from all of this because her father had been in the SS would have required a set of decisions and a set of scenes that the institution was not willing to produce. The scene was always worse than the cost. The courtiers absorbed the father story. They managed the press secretary's contradictory statements. They waited for the promised document that never came. They allowed the story to quieten through the specific mechanism of the story's quietening. The next story, the next week, the gradual retreat of the specific outrage into the specific background. What the father story also produced was the specific dynamic between Princess Michael and the palace's management operation that would define the next 4 decades. She had been caught. She had been caught in the specific form of the public story about the specific connection that the public story had made public. She had managed it, messily, with the contradictory statements and the unproduced document, but she had managed it, and the palace had absorbed it, and nothing had fundamentally changed. This taught her something, or confirmed something she already suspected. The palace would absorb. The palace would manage. The scene was always worse than the cost. The institution would not produce the scene. She was safe. Not safe in the sense of being protected from the stories. The stories would keep coming. But safe in the sense of the person who has tested the limits of what the institution will tolerate and has found that the limits are considerably further out than they first appeared. She was in the family. She was in apartment 10. She was Princess Michael of Kent, and the institution was not going to do the thing that the institution would have needed to do to make any of that stop. The father story was the first test. She passed it, not by being innocent, but by surviving it. Now examine what the 1985 palace response revealed about how the Buckingham Palace press operation actually worked when the story was about one of the family members rather than an external target. Michael Shea was the Queen's press secretary. He had 2 tasks on the day the Mirror published. The first was to verify enough of the story to respond to the press. The second was to manage the response in a way that minimized the damage. The 2 tasks were in direct conflict with each other. Verifying the story required confirming the specific facts. Confirming the specific facts produced the confirmation that the Mirror had the story right. But producing a statement of pure denial, having seen no knowledge, risked the worse outcome of the denial being exposed as false. He gave 2 statements, both true, both contradictory, both issued in minutes. This is not Michael Shea being careless. This is Michael Shea navigating the specific, impossible position of the palace press secretary, who has a factual story he cannot deny, and an emotional narrative, total surprise, total shock, that the principal is claiming. He threaded the needle as tightly as it could be threaded. He confirmed the fact. He attributed the surprise to the principal. He left the contradiction to stand because the alternative was worse than the contradiction. The Courtiers managed the father story. Princess Michael managed her response to the Courtiers managing it. Everyone managed. She was still in apartment 10. In 1986, 1 year after the father story, she gave a television interview. She was asked about it. She said the revelation had been deeply painful. She said her father had been a minor official. She said she was not responsible for the actions of her parents. She said she had spent her life proving her values through her own actions. She had. She was more industrious than most of the other royals. She wrote the books and gave the lectures and did the charitable work and turned up at the openings of the envelopes. She was, in the specific terms of the working output, a credible contributor to the royal family's public function. The father had been in the SS. Both things were true. The palace contained both things. The courtiers managed both things. The institution absorbed both things and continued. The Bavarian denazification court had classified Günther von Reibnitz as a lesser offender in 1947. He had appealed. They reclassified him as a mere follower. The classifications were the specific legal categories of the denazification process, the post-war West German legal framework for assessing degrees of involvement in the Nazi regime. Lesser offender, mere follower. These were not the categories of the innocent. They were the categories of the person who had been involved and whose involvement had been assessed as falling below the threshold of the major offender. He joined in 1930. He served 11 years. The SS itself kicked him out in 1944. The document that would have proved he was merely a minor official was never produced. It was 1985. She survived. The palace absorbed. The courtiers managed. Apartment 10 remained occupied. The father's story was over. The next story was already building. Diana moved into Kensington Palace in 1981. Princess Michael moved into Kensington Palace in 1981. They were neighbors for 16 years. Think about that for a moment. The most famous woman in the world, and the woman who would describe her as a convenient womb, living in the same building, sharing the same garden, attending the same family occasions, navigating the same corridors for 16 years. The dynamic was never going to be simple. Diana was 20 years old when she moved in. Princess Michael was 36. Diana was the Princess of Wales, the heir's wife, the future queen, the woman whose face was already on the covers of every magazine in the world within months of the wedding. Princess Michael was the wife of the Queen's cousin. She was constitutionally a minor figure. She was also, in her own assessment, and in the assessment, she communicated loudly to the people around her, considerably more royal than Diana, in the bloodline sense. Diana had no royal blood. She was an aristocrat. The Spencers were one of the oldest families in England, but she was not royal. Princess Michael had royal blood. Her mother was the daughter of a Hungarian count and an Austrian princess. Her father was a German baron. The genealogy was impeccable, in the specific European aristocratic sense of the impeccable. The Windsor family, she had been known to note, were originally German. She was German. They were German. The difference was the crown, and the crown, in her assessment, was not the same as the blood. Diana had the crown position without the blood. Princess Michael had the blood without the crown position. The specific tension between those two things lived in the corridors of Kensington Palace for 16 years. Ken Worf was Diana's protection officer. He was with her for 6 years, from 1987 to 1993. He was in the building. He was in the corridors. He was at the occasions. He saw everything. He said, in the accounts he gave after leaving the role, "I don't think Princess Michael's relationship with the royal family was particularly friendly, because there was an air of snobbery about her, an air of snobbery, from the man who watched both women operate in the same building for years. The snobbery was the specific quality of the person who has decided that the hierarchy visible to the outside world is not the hierarchy that actually applies, and who is communicating this assessment to the people around them through the specific form of the air. The air was always there. Diana felt it. Diana was not the person who failed to notice airs. She was the person who noticed everything, who read the room with the specific accuracy of the person whose survival inside the institution had required the reading of the room as a core skill. She noticed the air. She did not like the air. The relationship between the two women was never warm. It was never the relationship of the neighbors, who had found each other in the building, and who had made the building into a community. It was the relationship of the two women who had been placed in the same building by the specific architecture of the royal family's domestic arrangements, and who were managing the proximity with the specific civility that the proximity required, while privately holding the assessments that the civility was covering. Princess Michael's assessment of Diana is the assessment that has been preserved in the available record, in the specific form of the quotes that the available record preserves, when the quotes are the quotes of the person who says the things out loud. The most famous of those quotes is the convenient womb. Prince Charles used Diana Spencer as a convenient womb. She said this, out loud, to people, who told other people, who told the journalists who preserved it in the available record of the things said about Diana by the people who were in proximity to Diana during the marriage years. The convenient womb. The specific phrase requires the honest examination of what it was saying, and who was saying it, and why. What it was saying was the assessment that Charles's marriage to Diana had been organized around the production of the heir, rather than the emotional connection of two people who had chosen each other. That Diana had been selected for the specific biological function of producing the next generation of the succession, rather than for the specific human qualities that the marriage partner is selected for, when the marriage is the marriage of the person who has a choice. This was not entirely wrong, as an assessment of the Charles-Diana marriage. The marriage's specific character, the age gap, the specific selection process, the specific quality of the courtship, had produced the accounts that supported the assessment. It was an assessment that others were also making, if not always out loud in those exact words. But the specific words, convenient womb, were Princess Michael's words, and the specific context in which she said them, to people at the occasions of the Kensington Palace social world, in the proximity of the woman she was describing, was the specific context that made the saying of them the thing that it was. She was describing her neighbor, the woman whose apartment was down the hall, the most famous woman in the world, in those terms. The courtiers absorbed this. They absorbed the convenient womb, the same way they absorbed the free lunch, and the wogs at Calais, and the contradictory statements about the SS father. They managed the landing. They could not prevent the saying. They managed the landing. Diana knew what was being said. Diana knew the specific form of the court's circulation of private assessments. She had been living inside the court's circulation of private assessments since 1981. She knew how the information moved. She knew who was saying what about whom. She knew about the convenient womb. The relationship between the two women deteriorated across the 1980s. Not in the public form of the visible confrontation. The palace was very good at preventing the visible confrontation from becoming visible. In the private form of the two women who had assessed each other, and who had found the assessment wanting, and who were managing the proximity with the civility that the proximity required, while holding the private assessments at a temperature that the civility was struggling to contain. Diana found Princess Michael overwhelming. This is the account of the people who knew both women, and who describe Diana's experience of the proximity. Overwhelming in the specific sense of the 6-foot Valkyrie, who fills every room she enters, and who has opinions about everything, and who shares the opinions with the people in the room, whether or not the people in the room have expressed an interest in the opinions. Princess Michael found Diana naive. This is the implicit assessment of the convenient womb. The woman who had been used as a convenient womb was, in the assessment, the woman who had not understood what she was being used for. The naivety of the person who had arrived in the institution without understanding the institution's specific mechanisms. This assessment was also not entirely wrong. Diana had arrived in the institution without fully understanding it. She had been 20 years old. She had understood it more fully than Princess Michael's assessment credited by the time Princess Michael was circulating the convenient womb. But the original naivety had been real. The specific quality of the Diana-Princess Michael dynamic inside Kensington Palace in the 1980s was the quality of the two women who were each, in different ways, outside the core of the institution, and who were managing that outsideness in opposite ways. Diana was managing it by becoming more famous than the institution, by being the person whose fame exceeded the institutional frame. Princess Michael was managing it by asserting her superiority to the institution, by being the person whose bloodline exceeded the institutional frame. Two different responses to the same position. One of them worked. One of them produced the most famous woman in the world. The other produced the nickname Princess Pushy, and the Ward Hunt affair, and the convenient womb, and the apartments, and the rent-a-kents, and the ongoing management challenge for the people whose job was to manage the landing of everything. The one that worked was not Princess Michael's approach. She did not stop. She was incapable of stopping. The opinions kept coming. The assessments kept circulating. The courtiers kept managing. In 1987, she gave an interview to a French magazine. The interview contained the specific type of content that Princess Michael's interviews consistently contained: her views on the royal family's internal dynamics, her assessment of the various positions and their relative merits, her general sense of the landscape as she understood it from her position in it. The interview was translated. It circulated. The palace managed it. In 1988, she published her first book, The Serpent and the Moon, a history of Diane de Poitiers, the mistress of Henri II of France. The book was well researched. It was credible. It sold. It established her as a serious writer rather than simply a princess who had written a book. The industriousness was real. The output was real. She was writing serious books about European royal history while living in a Kensington Palace apartment funded by the Queen, maintaining an affair with a Texas millionaire, describing her neighbor as a convenient womb, and managing the ongoing fallout from the revelation that her father had spent 11 years in the SS. That is quite a list for the late 1980s. The courtiers managed it. They managed it because the alternative was the scene. The scene was the formal confrontation with the woman in apartment 10 who was the prince's wife, and who had the children, and who had the books, and who had the presents, and who was going to keep saying the things she was saying, regardless of what anyone told her. Nobody told her. The things kept coming. Diana was still down the hall. The convenient womb was still in circulation. The courtiers managed. In 2004, Princess Michael of Kent went to dinner at Da Silvano in New York. Da Silvano was a specific kind of New York restaurant. It was on 6th Avenue in Greenwich Village. It was the kind of place where you went to be seen, where the tables were close together and the clientele was the clientele of the person who wanted to be at the table next to the interesting person, and where the noise was the noise of the interesting people being interesting at close quarters. Princess Michael was there for dinner. Other people were also there for dinner. Some of those other people were black. They were, by the accounts of what followed, being louder than Princess Michael felt was appropriate for the occasion. She stood up. She walked to their table. She slammed her palm on it. Then she told them to go back to the colonies. The diners who were there described the specific sequence of events to the press. She had approached the table. She had slammed her palm down. She had said, "Their account. Enough already. You need to quiet down." She had then told them to go back to the colonies. The colonies. In 2004. In New York. To black diners. New York had been a British colony. It was not a British colony in 2004. The colony's reference is the reference of the person who has decided, in the specific moment of the restaurant confrontation with the people whose noise she finds objectionable, that the most available instrument for the dismissal of those people is the colonial reference. The colonial reference is not the neutral geographic observation. The colonial reference to black people in 2004 is the specific register of the dismissal that the colonial reference carries. She denied it. She denied going back to the colonies. She said, her account, that she had told them she herself was ready to go back to the colonies, that the colonies' reference had been autobiographical rather than directional, that she had been referring to her own travel history, her own movements, her own relationship to the available geography of the colonial world. This is not a reading of the sentence that the sentence's available grammar easily supports. Go back to the colonies, directed at a table of black diners, does not naturally pass as a statement about the speaker's own travel plans, but it was her account. She gave it. The palace absorbed it. She then gave an interview defending herself. The interview became its own problem almost immediately. She was trying to establish that she was not racist. She was doing this by providing evidence of her positive feelings toward black people. The evidence she provided was the following. I even pretended years ago to be an African, a half-caste African. But because of my light eyes, I did not get away with it, but I dyed my hair black. I traveled on African buses. I wanted to be a writer. I wanted experiences from Cape Town to right up in northern Mozambique. I had this adventure with these absolutely adorable, special people. And to call me racist is a knife through the heart, because I really love these people. These absolutely adorable, special people. This is the defense. The knife through the heart, because I really love these people. The people she loved so much, she had tried to pretend to be one of them. The people she had such affection for, that she had dyed her hair black to pass among them on African buses. The people whose buses she had ridden as a form of adventure. The specific adventure of the European woman who goes to Africa as an experience, and who takes the buses as a form of the authentic engagement with the absolutely adorable special people. The defense was worse than the accusation. By this point, 2004, the accounting of what the palace had been absorbing for Princess Michael of Kent was the accounting of the following: the Ward Hunt affair, the convenient womb, the SS father, the unproduced document, the contradictory statements, the £69 a week, the £120,000 a year from the Queen's private funds, the princess who would go anywhere for a free lunch, the WOGs beginning at Calais, and now the restaurant in New York. The WOGs beginning at Calais quote is worth stopping on. She had said this in a different context, in a different year, in the specific form of the complaint about the English distrust of foreigners. She had said the English distrust foreigners. They think the WOGs begin at Calais. Calais is the French port closest to England, the first point of continental Europe visible from Dover. The WOGs beginning at Calais is the phrase of the person who is describing the xenophobia of the English who regard the continental European as the foreigner who begins at the closest available continental point. She was using the word to describe the attitude she was criticizing. She was the foreigner, she was the continental European who began at Calais in the English imagination. She was deploying the xenophobe's vocabulary to describe the xenophobe's position. This is a defensible reading of the quote. It is not the only available reading. The other available reading is the reading of the person who uses the word with a specific comfort that the word does not deserve, and who is using it in the performance of the criticism, without fully registering the weight of the word she has selected for the performance. Both readings exist. The palace absorbed both. The New York restaurant incident produced more coverage than most of the previous incidents, not because it was necessarily worse in absolute terms. The convenient womb and the SS father were not minor incidents, but because it was visible. It happened in a public place. There were witnesses. The witnesses talked to the press. The press had the accounts of the people who were at the tables next to the incident and who had heard what was said. It was harder to manage than the things that happened in rooms. The palace managed it anyway. Princess Michael denied the specific phrasing. She provided the alternative reading, autobiographical colonies, not directional colonies. She gave the interview with the absolutely adorable special people. The palace absorbed the interview. Time passed. The next story came. She was still in apartment 10. Here is what is strange about the entire sequence. She was not a working senior royal. She received no public funding. She had no official role. She was the wife of the Queen's cousin. She was a minor figure in the constitutional hierarchy of the British monarchy. She had no specific function that required her to be in the public eye or at the public occasions. She was in the public eye constantly. She was at the public occasions constantly. She gave interviews. She made statements. She went to restaurants in New York and confronted the people whose noise she found objectionable. Nobody stopped her. Nobody could stop her. She was Princess Michael of Kent, and she was in apartment 10, and she was going to keep doing the things she was going to do, because there was no mechanism available to the people who might have preferred she didn't, that would actually prevent her from doing them. This is the specific untouchability, not the protection of the powerful person whose power insulates them from consequence, the untouchability of the person who exists in a position that has no formal accountability structure, who is a member of the royal family without being a working member, who has the title without the function, who has the access without the oversight. Working senior royals have oversight. They have private secretaries and press offices and communications teams, and the institutional apparatus of the senior working royal, whose public output is managed before it is public. They have the machine. The machine manages the output. Princess Michael did not have the machine. She had the apartment and the title and the opinions. The opinions went directly from her to the people she was telling them to. No press secretary in between. No approved statement. No managed communications strategy. The result was the New York restaurant. The result was the convenient womb. The result was the wogs beginning at Calais and the absolutely adorable special people. The palace received all of it. The palace press office issued the statements. The palace absorbed the coverage. The palace managed the landing. In 2004, the year of the restaurant incident, she was 59 years old. She had been in the royal family for 26 years. She had survived the SS father and the Ward Hunt affair and the convenient womb and the apartment scandal. She had written 3 serious books about European royalty. She had given the lectures and done the charitable work and appeared at the occasions. She had also told black diners in a New York restaurant to go back to the colonies. The palace absorbed all of it simultaneously. The books and the lectures and the colonies, the charitable work and the wogs, the serious royal history and the absolutely adorable special people. All of it, simultaneously, was Princess Michael of Kent. Ken Wharf had said, "Air of snobbery." He was being diplomatic. What the New York restaurant established, in the specific form that the New York restaurant establishes it, was that the snobbery was not an air. The snobbery was the operating system. The snobbery was what was running underneath all of it, underneath the books and the lectures and the charitable work and the industriousness that Tassir had credited. The operating system was the person who had grown up moving from Bohemia to Bavaria to Australia to Mozambique to Vienna to London, and who had arrived at the British royal family and had decided that she was the most royal person in the room, and who had been operating from that position for 26 years. When someone from that position goes to a restaurant and finds the noise objectionable, they do not ask the waiter to speak to the other table. They walk over and slam their palm down and tell the people making the noise where they should go, because they are the most royal person in the room. And nobody tells the most royal person in the room what to do. The palace had not told her what to do for 26 years. The palace was not going to start in 2004. She was still in apartment 10. The next incident was 13 years away. 13 years passed between the New York restaurant and the next major incident. 13 years of the books and the lectures and the charitable work and the Gloucestershire sheep and the Kensington Palace apartment and the walled garden she called her open-air drawing room and the ongoing management of the ongoing Princess Michael of Kent situation by the people whose job it was to manage the landing of the things that kept landing. Then Meghan Markle arrived. The specific occasion was the 20th of December, 2017. The Queen's annual Christmas lunch at Buckingham Palace. Extended royal family, cousins, in-laws, the full sweep of the Windsor family tree's outer branches. Meghan was attending for the first time. She was not yet married to Harry. The wedding was 5 months away. This was the first major occasion at which the extended family would encounter the American actress who was about to join them. It was a significant moment. The royal family understood it as a significant moment. The press understood it as a significant moment. Meghan understood it as a significant moment. Princess Michael arrived, wearing a blackamoor brooch. The brooch was approximately 2 inches long. It depicted a black figure in a gold headdress and robe. Blackamoor is the specific artistic style, originating in 16th century Venice, in which black figures are depicted in exoticized or subservient poses, often as servants or decorative objects. The style has been considered racially offensive for decades. It was considered racially offensive in 2017. It was not a subtle artistic tradition to invoke in the specific context of the first major royal family occasion, attended by the biracial woman who was about to join the family. Meghan's mother is black. Meghan herself is biracial. This was her first Christmas lunch. The photographers caught the brooch as Princess Michael arrived through the palace gates in her car. The image went around the world within hours. Social media identified the brooch style immediately. The reaction was what the reaction to a blackamoor brooch worn to Meghan Markle's first royal Christmas lunch tends to be. The palace issued a statement the following day. A spokesman for Princess Michael of Kent said, "The brooch was a gift and has been worn many times before. Princess Michael is very sorry and distressed that it has caused offense." Stop on that statement for a moment. The brooch was a gift. This establishes that she did not purchase it deliberately for this occasion. It was already in her possession. It had been in her possession for long enough to have been worn many times before. She had worn it many times before, at many occasions before the one occasion on which the wearing of it would produce the maximum available notice and the maximum available reaction. The worn many times before is doing very specific work in that statement. It is establishing that the brooch was not a deliberate selection for this specific occasion. It is establishing prior use as evidence of the absence of deliberate intent. If she had worn it before, the statement implies, she was not wearing it now specifically to make a point about Meghan Markle. This is a reasonable argument. It is also the argument that requires you to accept that Princess Michael of Kent, who had been navigating the royal family's social world for nearly 40 years, who was 62 years old, who had survived the SS Father revelation and the New York restaurant incident, and the convenient womb and the wogs beginning at Calais, did not look at the brooch on the morning of the 20th of December 2017 and think about what the brooch might communicate at the specific occasion she was about to attend. That is a significant thing to accept. Finding Freedom, the Omid Scobie and Carolyn Durand book about the Sussex departure, published in 2020, addressed this directly. Palace insiders who spoke to the authors said that Meghan believed the brooch was not accidental. She believed it was deliberate. She believed the choice of that brooch for that occasion was a message. Meghan's belief is not the evidence of intent. Meghan's belief is the account of the person who received the brooch in the context of the occasion and who formed an interpretation of the context. The interpretation may be accurate. The interpretation may be the over-reading of the person who is attending their first royal Christmas lunch and who is alert to signals that the occasion might be producing. Both are possible. What is not possible to accept uncritically is the palace's statement that the brooch's prior use eliminates the question of deliberate intent. People wear things deliberately. People who own brooches choose which brooch to wear on which occasion. The selection of the blackamoor brooch, from whatever collection of jewelry Princess Michael of Kent possessed, for the specific occasion of Meghan Markle's first royal Christmas lunch, is a selection that requires examination, regardless of how many times the brooch had been worn before. The examination produces two possible conclusions. The first is that she did not think about it, that she reached into the jewelry box and selected the brooch she selected, without the specific consideration of the occasion's specific context. That in 40 years of navigating the royal family's social world, she had not developed the specific awareness of the racial dynamics that the selection of a blackamoor brooch for this specific occasion required. The second is that she thought about it very carefully. The available record does not resolve which conclusion is accurate. What the available record does establish is that Princess Michael of Kent had a documented history. New York 2004, the wogs beginning at Calais, the absolutely adorable special people, of the specific insensitivity to racial dynamics that the first conclusion requires, and that the specific insensitivity had never previously been stopped or corrected by the people around her. Nobody had told her about the brooch, not before the 20th of December 2017, not at any of the many occasions before that date on which she had worn it. She was very sorry and distressed. The apology was issued through a spokesman. She did not appear in public to give it. She did not give an interview. The statement was issued. The statement was 3 sentences. Worn many times before. Very sorry. Distressed. She reportedly stopped wearing the brooch after this. Now add the sheep. Artish Taseer published his Vanity Fair account in April 2018, 4 months after the brooch. He had dated Princess Michael's daughter Lady Gabriella for several years. He had spent time at Nether Lypiat Manor in Gloucestershire. He had been inside the family. He knew things. One of the things he knew was that Princess Michael had 2 black sheep at the manor. She had named them Venus and Serena, after Venus and Serena Williams, the black American tennis champions whose specific prominence in the sport made them the most recognizable black athletes in the world. Tarsier described the naming as something done out of what felt like a desire to shock. He noted that most people who knew Princess Michael thought she was, in his words, perfectly ghastly. He also said she could be funny, intelligent, generous, and considerably more hard-working than most royals. The desire to shock, the perfectly ghastly, the funny and intelligent and generous. These things coexist. This is important to hold. The person who names black sheep after the Williams sisters is not necessarily a person who hates black people. They may be a person who has a poor understanding of how naming works, or a poor understanding of why the naming would be received as it would be received, or a specific relationship to provocation as a social mode. The person who says the thing that will produce the reaction, because producing the reaction is the available entertainment. Or they may be a person who has a specific set of attitudes toward race that the accumulated evidence of the New York restaurant and the brooch and the absolutely adorable special people and the sheep's names together represents. All of those readings are available. The palace absorbed all of them without ever producing the statement that addressed them as a pattern rather than as individual incidents. Because here is what the palace never said. The palace never said, Princess Michael of Kent has a pattern of behavior involving racial insensitivity that we are addressing seriously. The palace issued individual statements about individual incidents. Very sorry about the brooch. She didn't say go back to the colonies. She said she was ready to go back to the colonies herself. Each incident managed separately. The pattern never named. The pattern, New York 2004. Wogs beginning at Calais. Absolutely adorable special people. Black sheep named Venus and Serena. Blackamoor brooch at Meghan's first Christmas lunch. The pattern spans at least 13 years of documented incidents. It is possibly longer. Those are the ones that made it into the available record. The available record is the record of the incidents that reached the press. The press is not the record of everything. What the palace could not say, what the palace had no mechanism for saying, was the statement that the pattern required. Because saying the statement that the pattern required would require naming the pattern. Naming the pattern would require confronting the person whose pattern it was. Confronting the person would produce the scene. The scene was always worse than the cost. The scene was the scene of the formal confrontation between the institution and the 62-year-old woman in apartment 10, who had been there since 1981, and who was the wife of the Queen's first cousin, and who had the books and the lectures and the charitable work, and who was going to tell you that she had worn the brooch many times before, and that it was a gift, and that she was very sorry and distressed. There was no mechanism. There had never been a mechanism. Meghan Markle was at her first Christmas lunch. Princess Michael was in the car with the brooch on her shoulder. The photographers caught it. The world reacted. The palace issued 3 sentences. She was still in apartment 10. If you are enjoying this story so far, hit the like button and subscribe. It genuinely keeps this channel going, and I read every single comment. Drop one below, telling me where in the world you are watching from. In May 2021, Channel 4 and the Sunday Times published an investigation. Undercover reporters had posed as representatives of a South Korean gold trading company. They had approached Prince Michael of Kent. They had offered him money in exchange for using his royal connections to help their business. He said yes. The specific terms of the arrangement were recorded. Prince Michael would give a speech from his apartment at Kensington Palace, from inside the palace itself, in exchange for $200,000. He would also travel to Moscow and make introductions to Russian contacts, including, the reporters understood, connections to Vladimir Putin's government, in exchange for a further $50,000. He described himself in the recording as very excited about the opportunity. Very excited. The year was 2021. Britain and Russia were not in a warm period of bilateral relations. Russia had poisoned Sergei Skripal and his daughter in Salisbury in 2018, a nerve agent attack on British soil. Russia had been sanctioned. The relationship between the two countries was, at the point of the recording, the relationship of two countries that had not resolved the specific question of whether Russia was conducting acts of war against Britain on British territory. And the Queen's first cousin was very excited to sell access to his Kensington Palace home and his Russian connections for $250,000. Prince Michael has a specific relationship to Russia that goes beyond the commercial. He is related to the Romanovs. His mother, Princess Marina, of Greece and Denmark, was a Romanov cousin. He looks like Tsar Nicholas II to a degree that the photographs make remarkable. He speaks Russian. He has Russian friends. He has, over the decades, cultivated the specific identity of the British royal with the Russian soul. The cousin of the Queen, who is also, in some ancestral sense, the cousin of the last Tsar. This identity had commercial value. The commercial value had been the commercial value of the unfunded minor royal whose available credential was the credential that the commercial world would pay for. The credential was the royal connection. The royal connection was available for $250,000. The reporters were not South Korean gold traders. The arrangement was not real, but Prince Michael's willingness to enter the arrangement, his very excitedness about the opportunity, was real. It was recorded. Channel 4 had the footage. The Sunday Times had the details. The story broke on the 10th of May 2021. The coverage described it as a royals for hire scandal. The specific phrase, royals for hire, was the phrase that Charles had anticipated with the rent-a-Kents designation decades earlier. Charles had coined the phrase as the observation of the person who had watched the Kents operate in the specific commercial space of the minor royals who monetized their credential. The royals for hire scandal was the rent-a-Kents thesis confirmed in the specific form of the undercover recording. A spokesman for Prince Michael said he had been the subject of a sting operation. He was not aware that he was speaking to journalists. He believed he was engaged in a legitimate business discussion. The specific proposal as described had not gone ahead. The proposal as described had not gone ahead because the people who described it were journalists and the South Korean gold company was not real. Not because Prince Michael had declined. Buckingham Palace issued a statement. The statement said the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge, whose household Kensington Palace is officially associated with, were disappointed. The statement did not comment further on the specific content of the recordings. Disappointed. The palace's management of the $250,000 Russian access offer was the single word, disappointed. Now examine what the sting revealed about the 40 years of the arrangement. The arrangement, the £69 a week that became the £120,000 a year from the Queen's private funds, was the arrangement of the institution that had decided the scene was always worse than the cost. The scene in 1981 would have been the scene of telling the Queen's first cousin that his new wife was too much, that the apartment was unavailable, that the title came with expectations, the title was not meeting. That scene did not happen. The arrangement continued. The Queen paid. The Kents stayed. What the 40 years of the arrangement had produced was the specific condition of the people who have been in an arrangement for 40 years and who have concluded, from the 40 years, that the arrangement will continue regardless of what the arrangement produces. The arrangement had survived the SS Father and the Ward Hunt affair and the convenient womb and the New York restaurant and the brooch and the sheep. The arrangement was therefore solid. Prince Michael was very excited about the South Korean gold company. The sting happened in 2021. The Queen died in September 2022. She had been paying £120,000 a year from her private funds for 41 years. The specific total of the private payment across 41 years at £120,000 per year is the total that the total produces when you multiply £120,000 by 41. It is approximately £4.9 million. The Queen paid approximately £4.9 million from her personal funds over 41 years to cover the market rent on the apartment of the cousin, who was very excited to sell Russian access for $250,000. That is the arithmetic of the untouchability. After the Queen died, the question of the apartment became the question of what Charles would do with the apartment. Charles was king. The apartment was now the king's apartment to allocate. Charles had coined the rent-a-Kents. Charles had watched the 4 decades of the management from the position of the senior royal, who was senior enough to observe and junior enough not to be the one responsible for the managing. Now he was responsible. Reports emerged that Charles wanted the Kents to vacate apartment 10 and move to a smaller property. The smaller property suggested was Frogmore Cottage, the Windsor estate property that Harry and Meghan had occupied and then vacated. Frogmore Cottage is a substantial house, but it is not apartment 10 at Kensington Palace, with the 5 bedrooms and the 5 reception rooms and the walled garden that Princess Michael calls her open-air drawing room. The Kents did not vacate. As of 2025, they remain in apartment 10. Charles became king in September 2022. He suggested the Frogmore move. The suggestion did not produce the move. The Kents remained in the apartment that the Queen had been paying £120,000 a year to maintain for them, and that Charles had not yet found the mechanism to extract them from. The scene was always worse than the cost. This had been true under Elizabeth. It remained true under Charles. The 3 reigns of the title are the reigns of George VI, Elizabeth II, and Charles III. George VI died in 1952. Princess Michael arrived in 1978, during Elizabeth's reign. She has now been in the family for 47 years. She has been in the family across 2 full reigns and into the beginning of a third. The courtiers who managed her in 1978 are not the courtiers managing the situation now. Those courtiers are retired or dead. The people managing the situation now are managing something that began before they were managing it, and that has been producing the specific management challenge of the Princess Michael of Kent situation since before many of them were born. That is institutional memory's specific failure. The institution absorbs the person remains. The people who made the original decision to absorb, the people who decided in 1978 that the scene was worse than the cost, are gone. The cost continues. The people who are now bearing the cost did not make the original decision. They inherited it. This is the specific mechanism of the untouchability in its most precise form. Not a deliberate decision to protect Princess Michael. Not a conspiracy of silence organized around keeping her in the apartment and keeping the pattern unnamed. The specific institutional inertia of the thing that has been going on for so long that the people currently managing it have never known it to be otherwise. She has been in the apartment since 1981. Nobody currently at Kensington Palace was working there in 1981. They arrived to find Princess Michael already there. They managed the consequences of the things she said and the things she wore. They issued the statements. They absorbed the coverage. They could not have removed her. The removal would have required the scene. The scene would have required a formal confrontation between the institution and the person who had been in the institution for 47 years. The formal confrontation would have produced the specific public dimension of the formal confrontation. The specific public dimension would have been worse than the cost of the continued management. The scene was always worse than the cost. The sting was absorbed. The disappointed was issued. Prince Michael remained the Queen's first cousin. Princess Michael remained in apartment 10. The walled garden remained her open-air drawing room. Charles is king. The Kents have not moved. The institution manages. The management continues. The next part of this account examines why the management continued for 3 reigns, what the specific mechanism of the untouchability produced across the decades, and what it cost the people who had to keep absorbing it. Let's be precise about what untouchable means in this context. It does not mean protected. It does not mean the institution liked her, or approved of her, or wanted her there. Princess Anne called her Princess Pushy. Prince Charles called them the Rent-a-Kents. Viscount Linley said dinner with Princess Michael was what he would wish on his worst enemy. The Queen called her a Valkyrie to Lord Mountbatten. These are not the words of an institution that has decided to protect someone. Untouchable means something different. It means the specific condition of the person who cannot be removed, because the cost of removing them exceeds the cost of keeping them. Not the financial cost, though the £4.9 million arithmetic is striking. The social cost, the reputational cost, the specific cost of the scene that the removal would require. Understand the scene. The scene is the formal institutional decision to tell Princess Michael of Kent that she is no longer welcome at the royal family's occasions, that the apartment must be vacated, that the title, which she holds through her marriage to Prince Michael, not through any institutional grace, is no longer going to function as the credential that gets her into the rooms. The scene requires someone to have that conversation with her. Who has that conversation? The private secretary? The Lord Chamberlain? The King himself? Each option produces its own version of the scene. The private secretary produces the scene of the staff member delivering the institutional verdict to the woman who thinks herself more royal than the Windsors, and who will not receive the verdict quietly. The Lord Chamberlain produces the formal institutional scene, the most senior official of the royal household delivering the formal exclusion, which is the scene with the most available press coverage, when Princess Michael tells the people she tells things to that this happened. The king himself produces the scene of the sovereign formally confronting his cousin's wife, with all the family history that entails, with Prince Michael in the room, with the children, Frederick and Gabriella, who would be watching their mother be formally excluded by their father's cousin. None of those scenes is better than the cost of the apartment and the management. This is the specific arithmetic of the untouchability, not the £9 million. The comparison between the ongoing cost of the management and the one-time cost of the scene. The ongoing cost of the management is the cost of the statements and the absorbing and the very sorry and the disappointed and the courtiers managing the landing of the things that keep landing. It is real, it is sustained, it is 47 years of the sustained. The one-time cost of the scene is the scene, and the scene, in the specific form of the formal exclusion of Princess Michael of Kent from the British royal family, would produce a public dimension that the institution has consistently calculated to be worse than the sustained cost. Why would the scene be worse? Because Princess Michael talks. She has always talked. She tells people things. She told people about the convenient womb. She told people about the wogs beginning at Calais. She gave interviews to French magazines. She defended herself in the absolutely adorable Special People interview. A Princess Michael of Kent, who had been formally excluded from the royal family, would talk. She would talk at a level and with a specificity that the 26-year interview record suggests would produce content that the palace would find significantly more challenging than the ongoing management of the apartment and the brooch and the sheep. She would not produce a restrained, dignified silence. She would produce Princess Michael of Kent talking about what it was like to be formally excluded from the British royal family, with names, with quotes, with the specific detail of the person who has been inside the rooms for 47 years and who is now outside them, and who is no longer subject to the specific constraint of the person who needs to stay inside the rooms. The institution understood this. The institution had understood it since 1978. The specific calculation, keep her close enough to manage, never close enough to exclude, was the calculation that produced the 47 years. It also produced something else. It produced the specific condition of the courtiers who had to execute the calculation. The courtiers are the people whose professional function is the management of the royal family's public output. They are the private secretaries and the press officers and the communications professionals and the equerries and the specific variety of the senior institutional staff, whose daily work is the daily work of making the institution function. They are good at their jobs. The institution functions. The function is the evidence. Princess Michael was not a function they had been trained for. The training of the royal household's professional staff is the training of the person who is managing the output of the working senior royal, the person whose public function is the institutional function, and whose output is the output of the institutional function. The speech and the charity visit, and the investiture and the state dinner, the managed occasion with the approved photograph and the agreed message. Princess Michael was not the managed occasion. She was the unmanaged force that the managed occasion was constantly having to absorb. She gave the interviews without the approved content. She made the statements without the agreed message. She wore the brooches without the communications check. She named the sheep without the reputational assessment. The courtiers managed the aftermath, every time. The aftermath of the interview, and the brooch, and the sheep, and the restaurant, and the SS father, and the convenient womb. Each aftermath managed, each landing absorbed, each very sorry issued. The specific quality of the management across 47 years is the quality of the institutional operation that has been managing something it cannot control, by managing the consequences of the uncontrollable thing. You cannot control Princess Michael. You can manage what she leaves behind. Ken Worf saw it from the inside. He was Diana's protection officer. He was in the building. He watched the courtiers manage. He said she had an air of snobbery that made her relationship with the family not particularly friendly. The air of snobbery is the quality that the courtiers were managing in the specific form of the management of the consequences of the heir. The heir kept producing the consequences. The consequences kept requiring the management. Now examine the specific three-reign dimension. Under George VI, she was not yet in the family. She arrived in 1978, 26 years into Elizabeth's reign. George VI is in the title as the first of the three reigns, not because Princess Michael gave his courtiers specific trouble, but because the institutional framework that would absorb her was built during his reign. The specific culture of the British royal household, the management, the absorption, the scene avoidance, was the culture that George VI's household had refined. Princess Michael arrived into a machine that had been running for decades before she got there. Under Elizabeth, the machine ran for 44 years with Princess Michael inside it. The machine absorbed the SS father. The machine absorbed the Ward Hunt affair. The machine absorbed the apartment scandal. The machine absorbed the New York restaurant. The machine absorbed the brooch. The machine absorbed the sheep. The machine absorbed the sting. The machine absorbed 44 years of the consequences of the uncontrollable thing. Elizabeth paid the £120,000 a year. Elizabeth received the Valkyrie at the family's occasions. Elizabeth made the calculation that the scene was worse than the cost, year after year, for 44 years. Under Charles, the machine is running with different inputs. Charles coined the rent-a-kents. Charles watched 44 years of his mother's machine absorbing the consequences. Charles suggested the Frogmore move. The Kents did not move. Charles has not produced the scene. The scene is still worse than the cost. This is true under Charles, as it was true under Elizabeth. The specific cost has changed. It is now Charles's private funds rather than Elizabeth's. Charles's household rather than Elizabeth's. Charles's management rather than Elizabeth's. But the calculation has not changed. The calculation has never changed. Here is the specific thing about the untouchability that the three-reign account makes visible. The untouchability is not the product of affection. Elizabeth did not love Princess Michael in the way that the £120,000 a year might suggest. She called her a Valkyrie. She found her grand. She managed her because the management was the available option. The untouchability is not the product of power. Princess Michael has no power in the constitutional sense. She has no official role. She has no public funding. She has no formal institutional position that generates the power that protects the powerful person from consequence. The untouchability is the product of position. She is in a position, the position of the woman who has been inside the institution for 47 years, who is the wife of the Queen's first cousin, who has the children and the books and the apartment and the walled garden and the history, that the institution cannot easily alter without the scene. The position is not powerful. The position is irreducible. The irreducible position in the institution that cannot produce the scene to reduce it is the untouchable position. She understood this. She understood it by 1985 at the latest. By the time the father story had been survived, and the palace had absorbed it, and the apartment was still occupied, and nothing had fundamentally changed. She understood that the position was irreducible. She understood that the scene was always worse than the cost, and she operated from that understanding for 40 years. The courtiers managed, the management continued, the institution absorbed, the calculation held. 3 reigns, 1 apartment, 47 years. Artish Taseer spent years in Princess Michael's social world. He dated her daughter Gabriella. He was at the manor in Gloucestershire. He was at Kensington Palace. He was at the family occasions. He knew the people who knew her. He sat at the tables. He said most people thought she was perfectly ghastly. Not some people. Most people. The perfectly ghastly is the specific British social verdict, the phrase that the British upper class deploys when the British upper class has decided that a person's behaviour falls below the threshold of the acceptable, in the specific register of the unacceptable that the British upper class finds most egregious. Ghastly is worse than difficult. Ghastly is worse than awkward. Ghastly is the verdict of the person who has encountered you and who has concluded that the encountering was an experience they would prefer not to repeat. Most people thought she was perfectly ghastly. Taseer also said she could be funny. He said she could be intelligent. He said she could be generous. He said she was more industrious than most of the other royals. These things were also true. The perfectly ghastly, and the funny, and the intelligent, and the generous, all lived inside the same person. The people who encountered only the ghastly got the ghastly. The people who got the funny and the generous got something different. Which people got which depended on how she had assessed them. This is the specific quality of Princess Michael of Kent that the available record consistently establishes across the 47 years. She assessed, she formed a view. She distributed the warmth and the wit and the generosity to the people she had assessed as deserving of them, and the ghastly to the people she had assessed otherwise. The assessments were not always legible from the outside. The criteria were not published, but the effects were clear. The people who were inside the warmth experienced one thing. The people who were outside it experienced another. And the people who were outside it, or who observed her from the outside of the warmth, used words like perfectly ghastly, and air of snobbery, and princess pushy, and what I would wish on my worst enemy. Ken Worf had the outside view. He was Diana's protection officer. He was a professional whose function was the protection of Diana from external threat, not the management of the palace's social dynamics. He was in the building because Diana was in the building. He was at the occasions because Diana was at the occasions. He watched Princess Michael from the position of the person who is watching the room rather than performing in it. He said there was an air of snobbery about her. He said he did not think her relationship with the royal family was particularly friendly, not particularly friendly. Diana's protection officer, describing the woman who lived in the same building as Diana for 16 years, in those terms, what Diana herself thought has been partially preserved in the accounts of the people who were close to her. Diana was not publicly unkind about Princess Michael. Diana was not publicly unkind about most people. Her specific talent for the human connection was the talent that operated in the direction of the warmth rather than the cold. But Diana was also not the person who failed to notice the things happening around her. She noticed everything. She had learned to notice everything. Noticing everything was the survival skill. She noticed Princess Michael. The convenient womb was circulating in the corridors of Kensington Palace while Diana was living in those corridors. Diana knew it was circulating. Diana knew who was saying it. The knowledge was the specific knowledge of the person who is the subject of the thing that is being said about her, and who is living in the same building as the person who is saying it. 16 years, the same building, the convenient womb in the corridors. Diana managed this with the specific quality that Diana managed most things: the warmth in public, the private assessment kept private, the specific composure of the person who has learned that the available world is not always organized around her comfort, and who has built the management of that fact as the organizing principle of the available public life. She did not make a scene. There is no available record of Diana confronting Princess Michael about the convenient womb. There is no available record of the formal confrontation between the two women in Kensington Palace, that the 16 years of proximity, and the convenient womb, and the air of snobbery, and the assessed hierarchy of the bloodline versus the crown position might have been expected to produce. Diana did not make scenes, she managed. What the social world of Kensington Palace looked like in the 1980s and 1990s is the picture that the available accounts have assembled from the people who were inside it. It was not a domestic community in the ordinary sense. It was a collection of separately functioning households, sharing a building and the specific obligations of the family calendar, the Christmas events, the state occasions, the birthday gatherings, the specific occasions that the royal family produces as the occasions at which the family is the family in the public form of the family. At those occasions, Princess Michael was present. She was present in the specific form of the 6-foot Valkyrie who fills every room she enters, and who has assessed the room before she has crossed the threshold, and who knows where she stands in the room relative to every other person in it, and who distributes the warmth and the wit and the generosity according to the assessment. The rooms at the occasions contained people who had been on the receiving end of the assessment for years. They had developed their own assessments in return. Princess Anne's assessment was Princess Pushy. Charles's assessment was Rent-a-Kent's. Linley's assessment was what I would wish on my worst enemy. The Queen's assessment was Our Val. said to Mountbatten, with the specific quality of the observation that is also a warning. The courtiers at these occasions were the people whose professional function required them to manage the interactions between the people who had developed these assessments of each other and who were now in the same room. The management of the room is the specific skill of the person who knows where all the assessments are and who positions the people strategically and who monitors the interactions and who intervenes when the interaction is producing the content that the management is organized around preventing. The content that the management was organized around preventing when Princess Michael was in the room was the content of Princess Michael. The content of Princess Michael was the opinions and the assessments and the things said out loud that the people in the room found ghastly. The management positioned her. The management monitored. The management intervened when necessary. The management absorbed the things that the intervention had not prevented. This is not a theoretical description. This is what the courtiers were doing. At every occasion where Princess Michael was present, for 44 years of Elizabeth's reign and into Charles's, someone was managing the room. Someone was watching where the conversations went. Someone was absorbing the consequences of the conversations that went where the management had not prevented them from going. The specific cost to the courtiers is the cost that the available record does not preserve, in the form that the cost would require to be fully visible. Courtiers do not publish memoirs in the specific way that the people who have been managed by the institution publish memoirs. They maintain the silence of the professional, whose function is the maintenance of the institution's management of the things that the institution is managing. They do not produce the book about what it was like to manage Princess Michael of Kent's room presence at the royal family's occasions for 4 decades. The silence is the silence of the professional. It is not the silence of the person who has nothing to say. What Tarsier said, the most industrious of the royals, is the thing that the silence of the professional courtier covers. She worked. She showed up. She did the charitable engagements and the lectures and the books. She was more present in the public function of the minor royal than most of the people whose minor royal status exempted them from the public function. The courtiers managed the person who was doing more of the work than most, while simultaneously producing more of the management challenge than most. The two things were connected. The same quality that produced the industriousness, the drive, the ambition, the refusal to be the background figure, the determination to be seen and heard and noticed, produced the brooch and the sheep and the restaurant and the convenient womb and the SS father's managed contradictions. She could not be the first type, the type that adapts and becomes the chameleon and reads the room and fits in. She was constitutionally incapable of being that type. She had been the second type since Bohemia and Bavaria and Australia and Mozambique and Vienna and London. She was the type that decides the world should adapt to her. She had decided that. She had brought that decision to Apartment 10 in 1981, and she had been operating from it since. The world, the specific world of the British royal family and its courtiers and its management apparatus, had not adapted to her. It had absorbed her. The absorbing is not the adapting. The adapting would have been the world changing its expectations to accommodate her. The absorbing is the world continuing its expectations while managing the distance between those expectations and her. The distance was managed for 47 years, perfectly ghastly. Air of snobbery, Princess Pushy, Rent-a-Kents, what I would wish on my worst enemy. Those are the words of the people who were managing the distance. Those are the private assessments of the people in the rooms. Those are the words that the rooms produced when the rooms were the rooms without Princess Michael in them. The rooms where the people who had been managing the distance were among themselves. She was not in those rooms. She was in the room where she was the most royal person present. She was managing the room from that position. She was distributing the warmth and the wit and the generosity to the people she had assessed as deserving them. The people in the other rooms, the rooms without her, were saying perfectly ghastly and Princess Pushy and what I would wish on my worst enemy. Both sets of rooms existed simultaneously. They existed simultaneously for 47 years. The courtiers managed the space between them. Princess Michael of Kent has always had her own account of Princess Michael of Kent. This is not unusual. Most people have their own account of themselves. What is unusual is the specific character of her account, the confidence of it, the consistency of it, the specific refusal across 47 years to allow the available external account to replace the internal one. The external account is Princess Pushy, the Rent-a-Kents, perfectly ghastly. Dinner with Princess Michael of Kent as what you would wish on your worst enemy. The brooch, the sheep, the restaurant. Her account is different. Her account is the account of the European aristocrat of genuine royal blood who married into the British royal family and who has spent nearly 5 decades contributing to that family's public function through the industriousness and the books and the lectures and the charitable work, while being subjected to the specific snobbery of the English toward the foreigner. The foreigner who, in her assessment, has actual royal credentials that the Windsors themselves cannot match in the specific bloodline sense. Both accounts are available. She has never pretended the external account does not exist. She has addressed it, absorbed it, defended against it, and continued operating from her own account regardless. The books are the most visible expression of her own account. She has written 6 books. The Serpent and the Moon in 1988, about Diane de Poitiers, the mistress of Henri II of France, who wielded real political power in the 16th century. Crowned in a Far Country in 1986, about 8 European princesses who married into foreign royal families, their displacements, and their survivals. The Eugenius Trilogy, 3 novels set in 15th century Europe. Cupid and the King in 1991, about 5 royal mistresses and the kings who loved them. Look at those subjects, the European princesses who married into foreign royal families and survived the displacement, the women who wielded power in the courts of kings, the royal mistresses who shaped history from their position adjacent to the throne rather than on it. These are not random historical subjects. These are the specific historical subjects of the person who has organized her own life around the same themes: the foreign woman in the British royal family, the power wielded from the adjacent position, the survival of the displacement. She said it herself, "I live in the 18th century in my mind." The 18th century she lives in is the century in which the European aristocracy operated in the specific form of the people whose royal credentials were the credentials of the bloodline rather than the accident of the specific throne. The century in which the Saxe-Coburg-Gotha family, which became the Windsors in 1917, when the name was changed for reasons of wartime optics, were not yet the British royal family, but were one of many equally credentialed European royal houses. In her mind, she is from that world. In her mind, the Windsors are also from that world, just a specific branch of it that happened to end up with the British throne. The throne does not make them more royal than her. It makes them the specific branch with the specific throne. She has the blood. They have the throne. The blood was there first. This is the self-image. It is not a small self-image. It is the self-image of the person who has been assessed as Princess Pushy and Rent-a-Kents and perfectly ghastly, and who has received those assessments and filed them in the category of the English snobbery toward the foreigner and continued. The specific quality of the English snobbery toward the foreigner is a real thing. She was right about it. She experienced it. The wogs beginning at Calais is the phrase she used to describe the English attitude toward continental Europeans. Toward her specifically, toward the 6-foot Valkyrie from Nazi-occupied Czechoslovakia, who arrived in 1978 with the opinions and the volume and the genuine aristocratic credentials. The English distrust of the foreigner was directed at her. The Queen called her a Valkyrie. The family called her Our Val. Princess Anne called her Princess Pushy. The tone of all 3 nicknames is the tone of the specific English response to the person who is too much, too large, too loud, too foreign, too present, too confident in her own assessment of her own value. She was right that this was happening. She was right that the snobbery was real. What she was wrong about, or at least what the available record does not support, is the specific conclusion she drew from it, which was that the snobbery was the entire explanation for the external account. The external account is not only the snobbery. The external account also contains the New York restaurant. It contains the brooch at Meghan's first Christmas. It contains the sheep named Venus and Serena. It contains the convenient womb. These are not the products of the English snobbery toward the foreigner. These are the products of the specific choices she made in the specific moments in which she made them. The snobbery is real. The choices are also real. Both things are in the external account. Her account contains only the snobbery. She has said so publicly. She has said, in various interviews across the decades, that she has never been fully accepted by the British establishment. That the English find it difficult to accept the foreigner who is more royal than they are. That she has spent 47 years proving her value through her work and her books and her public function, and has been met with the specific resistance of the institution that does not know how to absorb the person who exceeds it. The exceeds it is the specific quality of her self-account. She exceeds it. The bloodline exceeds the Windsor bloodline. The work exceeds the work of most of the working royals. The books exceed what most members of the family have produced. The industriousness exceeds the industriousness of the people around her. Tassir confirmed the industriousness. He said she was more hard-working than most royals. This was the person who had dated her daughter, who had been inside the family, who had no particular reason to provide the charitable reading of the woman most people found perfectly ghastly. The industriousness was real. The exceeding was also real in the specific form of the output. What the self-account does not contain is the reckoning, the honest assessment of the brooch, the honest assessment of the sheep, the honest assessment of the New York restaurant, the honest assessment of the pattern across 13 years of documented racial incidents, the honest assessment of the SS Father's membership in a way that goes beyond the promised document that was never produced. She has not produced those reckonings. She has produced the other account. The account of the foreign woman in the English establishment, the account of the European aristocrat exceeding the institution that received her, the account of the industrious and the undervalued and the brilliant and the misunderstood. The 6 books are that account in historical form. The fictional Eugenius, the real Diane de Poitiers, the 8 European princesses, they are her, in the historical costume of the European royal woman who arrived in the court with the credentials and the ambition and the intelligence, and who made her mark, despite the resistance of the court that received her. She is the protagonist of her own story. This is true of most people. What is unusual is the specific gap between the protagonist of her story and the character in everyone else's. In her story, she is the European aristocrat who gave the institution 47 years of serious work and received the snobbery of the English establishment in return. In everyone else's story, she is Princess Pushy, the rent-a-kent, the woman who wore the brooch and named the sheep and told people to go back to the colonies and described her neighbor as a convenient womb. Both stories contain true things. The industriousness is true. The snobbery is true. The brooch is true. The sheep are true. The work is true. The 2 stories cannot be made to fully agree. They share some facts and they arrange those facts around different protagonists with different moral weights. In her story, the snobbery explains everything. In everyone else's story, the snobbery explains some things and the choices explain the rest. She is 81 years old. She has been in the British royal family for 47 years. She has outlasted the Queen, who called her a Valkyrie. She has outlasted Diana. She has outlasted the Ward Hunt affair, and the SS Father, and the convenient womb, and the New York restaurant, and the brooch, and the sheep, and the sting. She has produced 6 books. She has done the lectures, and the charitable work, and the openings of the envelopes, and the occasions. She has been in apartment 10 since 1981. She is still there. Her account of herself says she was always more than the nickname, that the nickname was the English establishment's failure to accommodate the person who exceeded it. The nickname says differently. The truth is somewhere between the 2 accounts, in the specific territory where the genuine aristocratic credentials and the genuine industriousness and the genuine contribution coexist with the brooch and the sheep and the restaurant and the things said out loud in the rooms and the corridors of Kensington Palace across 47 years. That territory is complicated. It is not the territory of the villain of the story. It is also not the territory of the misunderstood heroine. It is the territory of Princess Michael of Kent, which is its own specific territory. Nobody else has occupied it for 47 years. In 2025, Princess Michael of Kent turned 81. She was still in apartment 10. Reports emerged that she had suffered a stroke. Sources described a marked decline in her condition. She was understood to be bedridden, confined to the apartment that the institution had been unable to remove her from for 44 years, receiving care in private, with close relatives nearby. Her representative declined to comment on her medical condition. "We are grateful for the concern shown," the statement said, "but do not comment on private medical matters." The private medical matters. The same privacy that the institution had been extending to her affairs, and her opinions, and her brooch and her sheep for 47 years, was now being extended to her health. The not commenting continued. The absorbing continued. The managing continued in the specific form that the managing takes when the thing being managed is not the consequences of the things she was saying, but the condition of the person who had been saying them. She could no longer say them. She was bedridden. This is the specific quality of the ending that the 47 years has produced. Not the formal exclusion, not the scene that the institution was never willing to produce, not the confrontation that would have required someone to have the conversation with the 6-foot Valkyrie who thought herself more royal than the Windsors and who was not going to receive the conversation quietly. The ending is the apartment, the same apartment, the walled garden outside the window, the open-air drawing room that she had maintained for 44 years, the space where she had held the summer parties with the 150 guests, and the Indian Raj-style tent, and the portrait of Prince Michael on the easel for his 80th birthday. The garden is there. She is in the bedroom. Prince Michael is 83. He has the Russian connections and the consultancy, and the very excitedness about the South Korean gold company that was not a gold company. He has the remarkable resemblance to Tsar Nicholas II, and the fluency in Russian, and the honorary military patronages that the 2021 sting embarrassed. He is in the apartment. They have been married since 1978, 47 years. The marriage that required him to give up his place in the succession. The marriage that produced Frederick and Gabriella, and the Ward Hunt affair, and the convenient womb, and the New York restaurant, and the brooch and the sheep. The marriage that produced apartment 10, and the walled garden, and the £4.9 million of the Queen's private funds, and the Kents, who would not move to Frogmore. 47 years. One apartment, still there. What the final chapter of Princess Michael of Kent looks like from the outside is the picture that the available accounts have produced. The bedridden 81-year-old in the Kensington Palace apartment that nobody ever quite managed to move her out of. The stroke, and the marked decline, and the close relatives nearby, and the representative not commenting on private medical matters. What it looks like from the inside is not available. It is the private medical matter. The not commenting applies. She wrote 6 books about European women who wielded power from the adjacent position. She wrote about the women who arrived in foreign courts with the credentials and the ambition and the intelligence, and who made their mark despite the resistance of the courts that received them. She wrote, in other words, about herself in the historical costume of the women whose specific experiences most closely resembled her own. The endings of those women were various. Diane de Poitiers, the mistress of Henri II who wielded real political power in 16th century France, was effectively removed from court when Henri died in 1559, and his widow Catherine de' Medici took power. She retired to her chateau at Annette. She was stripped of the jewels the king had given her. She lived another 7 years and died at 66. The 8 European princesses who married into foreign royal families had various endings. Some adapted, some never did. Some spent decades in the foreign court producing the work, and the children, and the public function, while maintaining the private assessment that the court they had arrived in was not the court they deserved. Princess Michael's ending is the apartment, the same apartment, the walled garden outside, the marked decline, the not commenting on private medical matters. She had said, "I live in the 18th century in my mind." The 18th century of her mind was the century of the European aristocracy operating in the specific form of the people whose credentials were the credentials of the bloodline, and who moved between the courts of the continent with the specific confidence of the people who knew their value, regardless of which court they were in. She had moved through 6 countries before she found the court she decided to stay in. She had moved from Bohemia to Bavaria to Australia to Mozambique to Vienna to London, and she had found the British royal family, and she had decided she was going to stay. She stayed. For 47 years she stayed. Through the SS Father, and the Ward Hunt affair, and the convenient womb, and the New York restaurant, and the brooch, and the sheep, and the sting, and the 3 rains, and the £4.9 million, and the Frogmore suggestion, that produced nothing, and the disappointed, that was the palace's entire response to the $250,000 Russian access offer. She stayed through all of it. The institution absorbed all of it. The scene was always worse than the cost. Now she is 81 and bedridden in the apartment. The institution is still not producing the scene. There is no scene to produce. The person who produced the scenes for 47 years is in the bedroom with the close relatives nearby, and the representative not commenting on private medical matters. The courtiers who managed her in the 1980s are retired. The courtiers who managed her in the 1990s are retired. The courtiers who managed the New York restaurant in 2004 are retired. The courtiers who managed the brooch in 2017 are gone. The courtiers who managed the sting in 2021 are still there, but managing different things now. Nobody is managing Princess Michael of Kent right now. The management has passed from the professional courtiers to the close relatives nearby, and the representative not commenting, and the quiet of the Kensington Palace apartment where she has been since 1981. The quiet of the apartment is not the quiet of the institution having resolved anything. The institution has not resolved anything. She is in the apartment because the institution never produced the scene that would have moved her out of it. She is in the apartment because she stayed and the institution absorbed, and the scene was always worse than the cost. The quiet is the quiet of the 47 years arriving at the specific point at which the 47 years have arrived. Prince Michael was a page boy at the Queen's wedding in 1952. He was 10 years old. His mother, the beautiful Princess Marina of Greece and Denmark, was in the congregation. His father had been dead for 10 years, killed in the wartime plane crash when Michael was 4 months old. The small boy in the page boy's outfit at the Queen's wedding in 1952 was the man who would give up his place in the succession in 1978 to marry the 6-foot Valkyrie from Karlovy Vary. The Valkyrie is in the bedroom now. The page boy is 83. The walled garden is outside the window. The Indian Raj-style tent is not there. The 150 guests are not there. The portrait of Prince Michael on the easel for his 80th birthday is not there. The summer parties are not there. The apartment is there. The garden is there. They are still there. The institution managed her for 47 years. The management produced no resolution. The person who required the management is now in the condition that the management did not produce, and that the institution did not enforce, and that the 47 years eventually delivered in the form of the marked decline, and the private medical matter, and the not commenting. She was the most industrious of the royals. She was perfectly ghastly to most people. She wore the brooch. She named the sheep. She told people to go back to the colonies. She wrote 6 books about European women who wielded power from the adjacent position. She thought herself more royal than the Windsors. She is in apartment 10. The close relatives are nearby. The representative is not commenting. The institution never moved her. Time is doing what the institution would not. There are details in the account of Princess Michael of Kent that have not yet appeared in this account. They appear now. The plagiarism. Her first book, Crowned in a Far Country, published in 1986, contained passages that had been lifted almost verbatim from other works. This was not a dispute about influence or inspiration, or the specific fuzzy territory of the historian who has absorbed her sources so thoroughly that the sources have become her own voice. This was passages lifted almost verbatim. At least one author received an out-of-court settlement, a plagiarism settlement, for the book she had written about 8 European princesses who married into foreign royal families and who survived their displacements. The book that was, in the specific way that all her books were, also about her. The plagiarism was absorbed. The settlement was paid. The book remained in print. She wrote 5 more books. Nobody mentioned the plagiarism when reviewing the subsequent 5 books, in the specific way that a plagiarism settlement typically follows an author's subsequent work. The palace absorbed it. The settlement settled it. The subsequent books were reviewed on their own terms. She was also seen leaving the apartment of Ward Hunt wearing a red wig. The red wig, not a subtle choice for the woman whose natural hair is famously blonde. The News of the World ran the headline. It said she was torn between the prince and the Texan. The headline was the specific type of the News of the World headline that the News of the World ran when the News of the World had the specific story that the specific headline was summarizing. The red wig and the News of the World headline. The palace absorbed these too. There was also John Warner, United States Senator from Virginia, Elizabeth Taylor's sixth husband. Princess Michael was seen canoodling with him in a New York movie theater. The canoodling was noted. It was noted in the specific form that the canoodling of the Queen's cousin's wife with Elizabeth Taylor's ex-husband is noted when the noting is available to the people who are noting it. The Ward Hunt affair, the John Warner canoodling, the red wig leaving the apartment, the News of the World headline. The palace absorbed all of these. The father had been friends with Hermann Goering. This detail arrived in the coverage of the 1985 father story, in the specific form of the additional detail that the journalists who were digging into the father's background produced when they produced the additional detail. Hermann Goering was not a minor Nazi official. Hermann Goering was Hitler's right-hand man. He was the founder of the Gestapo. He was the commander of the Luftwaffe. He was convicted at Nuremberg and sentenced to death. He committed suicide with a cyanide capsule the night before his scheduled execution. Baron Gunther von Reibnitz, the SS officer whose membership Princess Michael had claimed was a total surprise, had been friends with the man who founded the Gestapo and committed suicide to avoid Nuremberg. The palace absorbed this. She had claimed, in the subsequent television interview about the father story, that she knew he had been in the party but had grown up thinking it was an honorary role to protect himself. When the 1985 story broke, she had called her mother. Her mother confirmed the SS. Princess Michael said, "Here I am, 40 years old, and I discover something that is really quite unpleasant. I shall simply have to learn to live with it." She had said this publicly, out loud. "Here I am, 40 years old, and I discover something quite unpleasant." The Courtiers reviewer who reviewed Crowned in a Far Country had a line about the book that has been preserved in the available coverage. The reviewer noted that in Princess Michael's telling of the stories of these poor little princesses married off abroad, she cannot shed or even conceal her belief that royalty are just better than the rest of us. Royalty are just better than the rest of us. The reviewer had identified, in the specific form of the book review, the operating system. The operating system that had produced the New York restaurant and the brooch and the sheep and the convenient womb and the wogs beginning at Calais, and the red wig leaving Ward Hunt's apartment, and the Goering connection, and the plagiarism settlement, and the John Warner canoodling in the New York movie theater. Royalty are just better than the rest of us. This was the foundation. Not the European aristocrats' misunderstood confidence, not the foreigners' self-preservation in the English establishment. The specific belief, held with the specific conviction of the person who has organized their entire life around it, that the bloodline creates a category distinction between the person who has it and the person who does not. The people who have it are better. She has it. Therefore she is better. The people at the restaurant who were being noisy needed to be quiet because she was there and she was better. The brooch could be worn to Meghan's first Christmas because she was there and she was better. The black sheep could be named Venus and Serena because naming them was a joke, and jokes require a distance between the person making the joke and the subject of the joke, and she was better, so the distance was available. This is not the charitable reading of the operating system, but it is the reading that the Courtiers reviewer identified in 1986, and that the subsequent 40 years of the available evidence has continued to support. Now look at what happened in December 2024. She fell down the stairs of Kensington Palace. She was carrying overcoats. She lost her footing. She put out her hands to break the fall and broke multiple small bones in both wrists, in splints. She attended King Charles's pre-Christmas lunch at Buckingham Palace the same day, both wrists in splints. Pre-Christmas lunch at Buckingham Palace, she attended. She told the Daily Mail, "So many things that you rely on being able to do, like cleaning your teeth, are impossible." She said, "I can type with one finger on a mobile, but I can't use a laptop." She said, I am told that after an accident like this, if you do one wrong movement on top of the unhealed bones, you are back where you started. She attended the Christmas lunch with both wrists in splints. The woman who was bedridden after the stroke. The woman who had broken both wrists falling down her own stairs. She got into the car and went to Buckingham Palace. This is the other side of the operating system. Not the brooch and the sheep and the restaurant. The other side, the absolute refusal to be diminished by the available circumstances. The determination to be present, to be there, to be in the room, regardless of the specific condition of the wrists, or the health, or the advancing years, or the marked decline. She was going to be at the Christmas lunch. Both wrists in splints or not. This is Princess Pushy in its most elemental form, not the pushing for the better seat, or the more prominent position, the pushing through the broken wrists to the Christmas lunch, the pushing through the fall on the stairs to the car to the palace, the refusal to be the person who stays home because of the wrists. Nobody told her to stay home. Nobody tells the most royal person in the room to stay home. She has had heart surgery. She broke both wrists. She has had the stroke. She is bedridden with the marked decline. And in December 2024, before the stroke reports, she was at the Christmas lunch with both wrists in splints. The plagiarism, the red wig, the Goering connection, the John Warner canoodling, the heart surgery, the broken wrists, the Christmas lunch in splints, all of it absorbed, all of it managed, all of it producing the Courtiers' management of the landing of the things that kept landing. 3 reigns of Courtiers. The Courtiers who managed the red wig and the News of the World headline are retired. The Courtiers who managed the Goering revelation are retired. The Courtiers who managed the plagiarism settlement are retired. The Courtiers who managed the convenient womb and the New York restaurant and the brooch and the sheep and the sting are various stages of retired or still managing. The Courtiers who were managing things in December 2024, when she fell down the stairs and went to the Christmas lunch in splints, were managing the specific current situation of the management that had been ongoing since 1978. The management is ongoing. She is bedridden. Charles is king. The Kents have not moved from apartment 10. The royalty are just better than the rest of us is still there. It is in the bedroom now, with the stroke and the marked decline and the close relatives and the representative not commenting on private medical matters. It has been there since Bohemia. Frederick was born on the 6th of April 1979. Gabriella was born on the 23rd of April 1981. They grew up in apartment 10 at Kensington Palace, in the building where Diana and Charles lived, in the building where the wardrobes contained the red wig and the brooch, and the opinions, and the volume, and the specific quality of the mother, who thought herself more royal than the Windsors. That is a specific childhood. They were styled Lord Frederick Windsor and Lady Gabriella Windsor from birth, not Prince and Princess, because their father had given up his succession rights to marry their mother. The specific consequence of the Catholic marriage extended to the children who were the children of that marriage. They had the royal family name. They had the Kensington Palace address. They did not have the Prince and Princess titles that the address might have suggested. This distinction mattered. It mattered in the specific way that distinctions within the British royal family matter, in the way that the title shapes the institutional position and the institutional position shapes the available life. They were royal adjacent, present in the building, at the family occasions, in the photographs at the palace events, but not working royals, not HRH, Lord Frederick and Lady Gabriella, in the family where the titles determined so much of the available world. Their mother had strong views about this. She had strong views about most things, but on the matter of her children's titles and positions, she was particularly vocal, with the specific vocality of the person who believed her children deserved more than the institution had allocated to them. She had royal blood. She was more royal than the Windsors. Her children should have the prince and princess designations that the children of the Queen's cousins' children should have. They did not get them. The institution did not produce them. Frederick went to Eton. He went to Oxford. He went into banking, J.P. Morgan's private banking division. He married actress Sophie Winkleman in 2009. They have 2 daughters, Maud and Isabella. They live in Los Angeles. He is 45 years old. and he is a banker in Los Angeles. And he is the son of Princess Michael of Kent, who grew up in apartment 10 at Kensington Palace, and who has, by the available accounts, managed to build a life at a considerable geographical distance from the specific atmosphere of that apartment. Los Angeles. When your mother is Princess Michael of Kent, and you have the means and the inclination, Los Angeles is one available response. In 1999, Frederick was 18 years old. A story appeared in the Sunday Times. He had used cocaine. He had said so himself, directly, in the interview, without the managed statement and the palace spokesperson. He told the Sunday Times, "I admit, it is true. It is very difficult to avoid getting into this sort of thing when you move in these circles, but I don't blame anyone else for the incident. I don't blame anyone else. The specific personal responsibility of the 18-year-old admitting the cocaine in the Sunday Times." Princess Michael responded. She said, "I brought my children up to be anti-drugs. I am disappointed that he experimented in this way, but he has assured me that he will not do it again, and I believe him. I believe him." The mother who brought the children up to be anti-drugs, believing her son that he will not do it again. She stood behind him. The statement was warm. The statement was maternal. The statement was the statement of the mother who was not going to let the Sunday Times cocaine story be the story that defined her son, without her saying something about who her son actually was. She was difficult. She was perfectly ghastly to most people. She had the opinions and the volume and the red wig and the brooch. But she stood behind her son in 1999, when the Sunday Times had the cocaine story, and the standing behind was the standing of the mother who was in his corner. Frederick recovered. He went to banking. He married Sophie Winkleman. He moved to Los Angeles. He is, by all available accounts, doing fine. Gabriella's story is different. Lady Gabriella Windsor, she took the name Lady Gabriella Kingston after her 2019 marriage, was 42 years old in February 2024 when her husband died. Thomas Kingston was 45. He had worked in finance. He had been a government advisor. He was described by the people who knew him as warm, intelligent, and deeply kind. He and Gabriella had married at St. George's Chapel, Windsor, in May 2019, a full royal wedding at Windsor Castle, attended by the Queen, attended by the family. A significant occasion, a happy occasion. He died on the 25th of February 2024. He was found at his parents' home in Gloucestershire. He died of a self-inflicted gunshot wound. He was 45 years old. The death was the death of the person who had died by suicide, not the accident, not the sudden illness. The death of the person who had been carrying something that the people around him had not seen in the specific form that would have allowed them to see it in time. Princess Michael made a public statement. She said Thomas Kingston was a lovely man, so kind and thoughtful. She said, "We never had an inkling anything was wrong. We never had an inkling anything was wrong." The statement is the statement of the person who is describing, in the only available honest terms, the specific experience of the loss that arrives without the warning that the loss might have allowed to be prevented if the warning had been visible. We never had an inkling. They were there. They were the family. They were in the rooms. They never had an inkling. This is not a comfortable sentence. It is the honest sentence of the grieving family. We never had an inkling. The inkling was not there to be had, and so it was not had. And the man who had been described as warm and intelligent and deeply kind was found at his parents' home in Gloucestershire on the 25th of February 2024. He was 45. Gabriella was 42. She is the daughter of Princess Michael of Kent. She grew up in apartment 10 at Kensington Palace with the mother who had the opinions and the volume and the brooch and the sheep and the operating system that royalty are just better than the rest of us. She married the warm, intelligent, deeply kind man. She lost him at 42. The palace managed the coverage of the death in the specific form that the palace manages the coverage of a death in the family. The statement was warm. The sympathy from the royal family was expressed. The coverage was handled with the care that the coverage of a suicide in the royal family requires from the people handling it. Princess Michael was at King Charles's Christmas lunch in December 2024, with both wrists in splints. She had fallen on the stairs. She had the broken wrists. She had the heart surgery behind her. She had the son in Los Angeles, and the daughter whose husband had died in February. She attended the Christmas lunch, both wrists in splints. This too is the portrait of Princess Michael of Kent. Not only the brooch and the sheep and the restaurant. The mother standing behind the son in 1999, when the cocaine story was in the Sunday Times. The grandmother of Maud and Isabella in Los Angeles. The mother-in-law who never had an inkling. The woman who fell on the stairs and attended the Christmas lunch anyway. The perfectly ghastly, and the maternal standing behind, and the never had an inkling, all lived in the same person. They have always lived in the same person. The Tarsier reading, funny, intelligent, generous, perfectly ghastly, more industrious than the rest, was the reading of the person who had seen all of it from the inside. The courtiers managed the outside. They managed the statements and the absorbing and the very sorry and the disappointed. They did not manage the inside. The inside was the family. The inside was Frederick and Gabriella and the cocaine story and Thomas Kingston found in Gloucestershire. The institution does not manage the inside of people. It manages the output. The output of Princess Michael of Kent, across 47 years, has been the brooch and the sheep and the restaurant and the plagiarism and the red wig and the convenient womb and the goring connection and the sting. Those are the outputs that the courtiers managed. The inside, the mother who stood behind her son, the mother-in-law who never had an inkling, the woman who attended Christmas lunch with both wrists in splints. That is not what the courtiers managed. That is what lived in apartment 10 behind everything else. Artish Taseer had been there. He had seen both. He had seen the perfectly ghastly and the funny and the generous and the industrious. He had been with the family when the family was the family rather than the management challenge. His reading was complicated. It was the reading of the person who had been inside and who was now outside and who was describing what he had seen from both positions. Most people thought she was perfectly ghastly. He had also seen the other thing. So had the people who were there for the cocaine story in 1999. I believe him, she had said. She had stood behind her son. So had Gabriella's husband, who had described Thomas Kingston as a lovely man, so kind and thoughtful. She had loved him. She had never had an inkling. The inkling would have made the difference, and it was not there to be had. The brooch is in the story. The sheep are in the story. The restaurant is in the story. The pleasant womb is in the story. The cocaine and the I believe him is also in the story. The lovely man, so kind and thoughtful, is also in the story. The both wrists in splints and the Christmas lunch anyway is also in the story. They are all the same person. They are all in apartment 10. The courtiers managed the part that needed managing. The rest lived behind the door that the courtiers were not managing. Let's do the accounting. Not the £4.9 million. That is the arithmetic of the apartment. And it is striking, but it is not the real cost. The Queen could afford £4.9 million. The institution could absorb £4.9 million. The real cost is the other kind, the kind that does not appear in the accounts filed at Companies House, or the Public Accounts Committee's findings, or the Palace's financial disclosures. The real cost is what it takes to manage an unmanageable person for 47 years. Start with the courtiers. The courtiers who managed the 1985 father story had been in their professional roles for years before Princess Michael arrived and had expected, when they took those roles, to manage the specific content of the working senior royal's public output, the speech and the investiture and the charity visit, the managed occasion with the approved content. They had not expected to manage the contradiction between total surprise and immediate confirmation in the same press cycle, from the same spokesman, about the same story. Michael Shea managed it. He issued both statements. He threaded the needle. He contained the specific damage of the specific morning as tightly as it could be contained. And then the next morning came, and the morning after that, and the morning after that. For 47 years, mornings came. The specific professional experience of being the person who manages the Princess Michael of Kent situation is the experience that the available record does not document in the form that the people who had that experience could document it if the palace's culture of silence did not produce the silence of the professional, whose function is the maintenance of the institution's management of the things that the institution is managing. They do not write the memoirs about it. They do not give the interviews. They absorb it in the same way the institution absorbed it, quietly, professionally, without the scene. But the cost was real. The cost of the management is real, in the specific form of the professional experience that the management produces in the person who is doing the managing. The specific experience of being handed the Da Silvano story in 2004 and being required to produce the institutional response to the Go Back to the Colonies and the autobiography, Not Direction Defense, and the absolutely adorable Special People interview. The specific experience of being handed the brooch story in 2017 and being required to produce the 3 sentences, gift, worn before, very sorry, that were the total available response. The 3 sentences were the total available response, because the alternative was the response that acknowledged the pattern. Acknowledging the pattern required confronting the person. Confronting the person produced the scene. So 3 sentences, every time, the minimum viable response. The response that contained the immediate damage without opening the larger accounting that the larger accounting would have required. The people who produced those 3 sentences were doing their jobs. They were doing their jobs well, in the specific sense of the person who is managing the unmanageable, within the constraints that the institution has set around the managing. The constraints said, no scene. The managing stayed within the constraints. 3 sentences. Now look at what the 3 sentences every time approach produced over 47 years. It produced the available record. The record of the incidents managed individually. The SS father managed individually. The convenient womb managed individually. The New York restaurant managed individually. The plagiarism managed individually. The brooch managed individually. The sheep managed individually. The sting managed individually. Each incident managed individually. The pattern never named. The pattern is the cost, not the individual incidents. The individual incidents are containable, each one absorbed, each one managed, each one producing the minimum viable response. The pattern is what the individual management of individual incidents produces when the individual management is the management that the institution has consistently chosen over the naming of the pattern. The pattern's naming was the available alternative at every point. After the New York restaurant, someone could have named the pattern. After the brooch, someone could have named the pattern. The naming of the pattern would have produced the scene, the formal confrontation with the woman in apartment 10, but it would also have produced the resolution. The resolution was the thing the institution was never willing to pay the price to produce. The price of the resolution was the scene. The scene was always worse than the cost. So no resolution, no naming of the pattern. 47 years of the individual management of individual incidents. The cost of 47 years of the individual management of individual incidents is the cost in the specific form that the sustained management of the unmanageable produces in the institution doing the managing. The institution becomes organized around the management. The management becomes the default response. The default response, 3 sentences, absorb, manage the landing, becomes the reflex rather than the considered decision. The reflex is the cost. When the reflex has been running for 47 years, the institution has lost the capacity to do anything other than the reflex in the specific situations that the reflex applies to. The brooch in 2017 received the same response as the SS father in 1985. 3 sentences, absorb, manage the landing, 32 years apart, the same response. Because the response had been the response for 32 years and the reflex was the reflex. This is what 3 reigns of Courtiers paid, not the 3 sentences per incident. The loss of the considered decision in favor of the reflex. The specific narrowing of the available response to the minimum viable response, sustained for so long that the minimum viable response is the only response the institution knows how to produce for this specific situation. Now ask the question that the account of the untouchability has been building toward. Was the calculation correct? Was the scene actually worse than the cost? The institution's calculation, consistently, across 3 reigns, across 47 years, was yes. The scene was worse. The scene of the formal confrontation with the woman in apartment 10 was worse than the ongoing cost of the management. Every time, 47 years of every time. Was it? The honest examination requires the honest examination of what the scene would actually have produced if it had been produced. The scene would have produced Princess Michael of Kent publicly discussing her formal exclusion from the British royal family. She would have talked with the specific volume and the specific opinions and the specific character of the person who has been inside the rooms for 20 years, or 30 years, or 40 years, and who is now outside them and who is going to tell the people who are listening what it was like inside. She would have told them about the convenient womb in the context of the family that had just formally excluded her. She would have told them about the Our Val, about the Princess Pushy, about the rent-a-kents, about the £69 a week and who was paying the real rate, about the things said about her in the rooms she was no longer in. She would have told them all of it, with names, with dates, with the specific detail of the person who had been there and who is now not there, and who no longer has the specific constraint of the person who needs to stay inside the rooms. The institution understood this. This is why the scene was the scene that was always worse than the cost. Not the scene of the formal confrontation itself. That scene is one afternoon of discomfort. The scene of the aftermath. The scene of Princess Michael of Kent talking about the aftermath. But here is the honest assessment of the calculation. The institution was managing the risk of what she would say after the scene. It was managing that risk by not producing the scene. And in managing that risk by not producing the scene, it was producing the ongoing cost. The 47 years of the SS father and the convenient womb and the New York restaurant and the plagiarism and the red wig and the brooch and the sheep and the sting and the 3 sentences and the absorbed and the manage the landing. The ongoing cost was real. The risk it was managing was also real. The calculation was not irrational, but the calculation had a specific blind spot. The blind spot was the pattern. The institution was calculating the risk of the scene against the cost of the individual incidents. It was not calculating the cumulative cost of the pattern. The pattern, the accumulated record of 47 years of the individual incidents managed individually, is a more significant cost than any individual incident managed alone. The pattern is the story that the external account has been telling for 47 years. Princess Pushy, perfectly ghastly. What I would wish on my worst enemy. The institution managed each incident individually. The pattern assembled itself in the external account. The external account told the story. The story is now the story of the 3 reigns of courtiers who paid the price of the calculation. Was the calculation correct? Probably. Probably the scene was worse than the cost, in the specific sense that Princess Michael of Kent, talking freely about the inside of the British royal family from the outside of it, with names and dates, and the specific detail of the 47 years, would have been worse than the ongoing management. But the calculation was made anew at each incident. At each incident, the institution reached the same conclusion, and at each incident, the pattern grew by one more incident: the SS father, the convenient womb, the New York restaurant, the brooch, the sheep, the sting, the red wig, the plagiarism, the Goering connection, the wrists in splints at the Christmas lunch, each one the scene being worse than the cost, each one the cost growing, each one the pattern becoming more established in the external account. By the time the stroke reports arrived in 2025, the pattern had been in the external account for 40 years. The 3 sentences, and the absorbing, and the manage the landing, had produced the record that the 3 sentences, and the absorbing, and the manage the landing, produces when those are the only tools available, and the pattern never gets named. The record is Princess Pushy, the rent-a-kents, the perfectly ghastly, the what I would wish on my worst enemy. The institution managed the cost, the pattern assembled, the external account told the story. 3 reigns, 47 years. The cost was real. 47 years of Princess Michael of Kent. 47 years of the SS father, and the Ward Hunt affair, and the red wig, and the convenient womb, and the plagiarism, and the New York restaurant, and the brooch, and the sheep, and the sting. 47 years of the 3 sentences every time, and the absorb, and the manage, the landing, and the scene is always worse than the cost. 3 things have not been said in those 47 years. 3 things that the institution could have said and did not say. 3 things that the courtiers could have said and did not say. 3 things that the people in the rooms where she was not, could have said publicly and said only privately. The first thing is the pattern. Nobody named the pattern publicly. Not after the New York restaurant, not after the brooch, not after the sheep, not after any single incident in the 47 years. Each incident was managed individually. The SS father was the SS father. The New York restaurant was the New York restaurant. The brooch was the brooch. The sheep were the sheep. Each one absorbed individually. Each one producing the minimum viable response. Each one then followed by the next one. The Courtiers reviewer named it in 1986, in the book review of Crowned in a Far Country. Royalty are just better than the rest of us. That was the operating system the reviewer identified in the specific form that the literary critic identifies the operating system of the person who has written the book. That was 1986. The New York restaurant was 2004. The brooch was 2017. The sheep were 2018. The Courtiers reviewer named it in 1986. The institution had 32 more years of incidents before the brooch. It named nothing. The second thing is the benefit. Nobody said publicly what the Kents actually provided in exchange for the £4.9 million and the apartment and the management across 47 years. The palace said in 2002, when the Public Accounts Committee found the £69 a week, that the Queen was paying the commercial rate in recognition of the royal engagements and charitable work that Prince and Princess Michael had been carrying out at their own expense and without any public funding. Royal engagements and charitable work. At their own expense. What were those engagements? What was that work? The palace did not specify. The palace produced the category, engagements, charities, without the specific content of the category. The specific content would have allowed the Public Accounts Committee and the British public to assess whether the specific content was worth the £120,000 a year and the ongoing management of the specific person who was also producing the brooch and the sheep and the restaurant. The specific content was never provided. The category was asserted. The committee accepted the category. The Kents stayed. Taysir had said she was more industrious than most of the royals. He had been inside the family. He had seen the work. He had also seen everything else. His specific assessment was that the everything else did not eliminate the work, that the industrious and the perfectly ghastly coexisted in the same person. But the public never received the specific accounting of the work that was being offered as the justification for the £4.9 million. The palace said engagements and charities. That was the total of the public accounting. The third thing is the question that the 3 reigns of courtiers never asked publicly. Was Prince Michael of Kent worth it? Not Princess Michael, Prince Michael. The quiet man with the Russian connections and the consultancy, and the Romanov resemblance, and the very excitedness about the South Korean Gold Company. He was the Queen's first cousin. He had been the page boy at her wedding in 1952. He was the reason the apartment was allocated. The apartment was allocated to the Queen's cousin, who happened to be married to Princess Michael. Prince Michael is the variable that the account of Princess Michael's untouchability consistently fails to examine. The untouchability is described as Princess Michael's untouchability, but it is Prince Michael's apartment. It is Prince Michael's family connection. It is Prince Michael's relationship to the Queen, the first cousin, the page boy, the man who looks like Tsar Nicholas II, and who represents the Queen at the independence celebrations of small nations, and who turns up at the Buckingham Palace balcony for ceremonial events, that generates the institutional position. Princess Michael is in the apartment because Prince Michael is in the apartment. Prince Michael is in the apartment because he is the Queen's first cousin. The untouchability is Prince Michael's untouchability, expressed through Princess Michael's behavior. The institution never said this. The institution managed Princess Michael as the management challenge. The institution did not say, the management challenge exists because of the prior decision to house the Queen's first cousin in apartment 10, and that prior decision was the decision of the institution about Prince Michael rather than the decision of Princess Michael about herself. She did not give herself the apartment. She did not give herself the title. She did not put herself in the position that the irreducible position required to be managed. She married the man who had the apartment and the title and the institutional position. The institution had housed Prince Michael. Prince Michael had married Marie-Christine von Reibnitz. Marie-Christine von Reibnitz had become Princess Michael of Kent, and the institution had spent 47 years managing the consequences of the prior decision to house the man who married the woman who became the person who produced the consequences. The prior decision was the institution's decision. The management was the institution's response to its own prior decision. Nobody said this. Instead, the three sentences were issued every time: the very sorry, and the disappointed, and the warn, many times before. The absorb and the manage the landing, and the scene is always worse than the cost. The three things that were not said, the pattern, the specific benefit, the prior decision, are the things that the 47 years of the three sentences, and the absorb and the manage the landing, were organized around not saying. Not saying them was the calculation. The calculation was the scene is always worse than the cost. The scene of naming the pattern was worse than the cost of the unnamed pattern accumulating in the external account. The scene of specifying the benefit was worse than the cost of the vague category absorbing the committee's question. The scene of examining the prior decision was worse than the cost of 47 years of the management of the prior decision's consequences. The calculations were made, the calculations held. Three things were not said for 47 years. Now examine what the not saying produced. The not saying of the pattern produced the external account. The external account is Princess Pushy, the rent-a-kents. Perfectly ghastly. What I would wish on my worst enemy. The external account is 47 years of the individual incidents, managed individually, and the pattern assembling in the external account that the individual management was not naming. The not saying of the specific benefit produced the public's inability to assess the arrangement. The public cannot assess what it has not been given the specific content to assess. The specific content was the engagements and charities without the specific engagements and charities. The public assessment was the £69 a week, and the outrage of the Public Accounts Committee, and the Queen secretly paying £120,000, and the specific arithmetic that the specific arithmetic produces when the specific arithmetic is the only information available. The not saying of the prior decision produced the management of Princess Michael as the source of the problem, rather than the marriage to Prince Michael as the source of the position that produced the problem. The management of the source of the problem rather than the source of the position is the management that produces the 47 years rather than the conversation about the prior decision that the conversation about the prior decision would have required. Three things not said. 47 years of the not saying. The not saying produced the management produced the 47 years, the 47 years produced the record. The record is the one this account has been assembling across 15 parts. The SS Father, the Ward Hunt affair, and the Red Wig, the convenient womb, the wogs beginning at Calais, the plagiarism settlement, the New York restaurant, and the absolutely adorable special people, the brooch at Meghan's first Christmas, the sheep named Venus and Serena, the sting, the £4.9 million, the three sentences every time, the three reigns of courtiers who paid the price of the three things not said, and now the stroke, and the bedridden, and the marked decline, and the representative not commenting on private medical matters, and the close relatives nearby, and the walled garden outside the window of apartment 10, where she has been since 1981. She fell down the stairs in December 2024 and broke both wrists. She attended the Christmas lunch with both wrists in splints. That is the last public image of Princess Michael of Kent that the available record has produced. Both wrists in splints. Christmas lunch she attended. That image contains everything. The operating system that royalty are just better than the rest of us. The refusal to be diminished by the available circumstances. The absolute determination to be in the room, regardless of the specific condition of the wrists, or the health, or the 47 years, or the three reigns of courtiers, who had been managing the landing of the things she kept producing. She was going to the Christmas lunch, both wrists in splints or not. Nobody told her not to. Nobody tells the most royal person in the room not to attend the Christmas lunch. The three things were not said for 47 years. The institution managed. The pattern assembled. The external account told the story, and she went to the Christmas lunch. both wrists in splints. Here is what the available evidence actually produces when you assemble it honestly, not the tabloid version. The tabloid version is Princess Pushy, the grasping, racist, impossible woman who wore the brooch and named the sheep and told people to go back to the colonies and described her neighbor as a convenient womb and lived in the palace for free for 47 years while the Queen quietly paid her bills. Not the sympathetic revision either. The sympathetic revision is the misunderstood European aristocrat, the woman of genuine royal blood and genuine credentials, who gave the institution 47 years of serious work and received the English snobbery toward the foreigner in return. Both versions contain true things. Neither version is the whole thing. The whole thing is more complicated. The whole thing requires sitting with the complication rather than resolving it into the version that is easiest to tell. Start with what is indisputably true. She worked. Tasia said it. He had been inside the family. He had no particular reason to be generous. He said she was more industrious than most of the royals. That is the verdict of the person who had seen the work from the inside. She wrote 6 serious books about European royal history. She gave the lectures and did the charitable engagements and represented the institution at the occasions where the minor royals' representation was the representation the institution required. She did this without public funding. She did this without an official role. She did this as the unfunded wife of the Queen's first cousin, who needed to generate her own income while maintaining the presentation of the princess that was the credential that generated the income. The work was real. Now the other side. The New York restaurant was 2004. The woman who slammed her palm on the table and told the black diners to go back to the colonies was not performing the operating system in the abstract. She was performing it in the specific form of the person who has walked up to the table of the people whose noise she finds objectionable and who has decided that the most available instrument for the management of the objectionable noise is the colonial reference directed at the people making it. That is not the snobbery of the English toward the foreigner. That is something else. That is the operating system in its most direct form. The specific belief that the person at the table is in the room with people who are beneath her and who should be told so. The brooch was 2017. The sheep were 2018. The New York restaurant was 2004. The wogs beginning at Calais was somewhere in the middle of those years. The pattern across 14 years of documented incidents is the pattern that the honest verdict requires to be called what it is. It is not the accident. It is not the unfortunate series of coincidences. It is the pattern of the person whose operating system has been producing consistent outputs across consistent years and who has never been required to examine those outputs in the form of the examination that produces the change. Nobody required the examination. The scene was always worse than the cost. The 3 sentences were issued every time. The pattern was never named to her face. The honest verdict on the pattern is the verdict that the pattern requires. The pattern is the pattern of the person who has a specific set of attitudes about race and about the hierarchy of people that the specific attitudes produce. The specific attitudes were expressed in consistent ways across consistent years. The expression of those attitudes produced the record. The record is the record this account has been assembling. The honest verdict holds both, the work and the pattern, the industriousness and the operating system. The standing behind Frederick and the sheep named Venus and Serena, the lovely man so kind and thoughtful and the convenient womb, the Christmas lunch in splints and the New York restaurant with the palm on the table, both are true simultaneously. This is not the comfortable verdict. The comfortable verdict is the one version or the other, the tabloid version or the sympathetic revision. The honest verdict holds both in the specific discomfort of the honest assessment. Now the institution. The institution's verdict on itself is the 3 sentences issued every time. Absorb. Manage the landing. Scene is always worse than the cost. 47 years of those 3 sentences produces the specific verdict on the institution. Not the verdict on Princess Michael, but the verdict on the institution that managed her. The institution managed her well, in the narrow sense. Each incident was contained. Each landing was managed. Each very sorry was issued. The specific immediate damage of each incident was minimized by the specific professional competence of the people managing it. In the narrow sense, the management worked. In the broader sense, the management produced the record. The record of 47 years of the individual management of individual incidents is the record of the institution that chose the reflex over the considered decision, that chose the 3 sentences over the naming of the pattern, that chose the scene avoidance over the resolution. The institution is not a villain for this choice. The choice was rational. The scene was genuinely worse than the cost in the specific sense that Princess Michael of Kent, talking from the outside about the inside, would have been significantly more damaging than the ongoing management of the inside. The calculation was not wrong. It was the calculation that the available options produced when the available options were the calculation. But the calculation had the blind spot, the pattern. The institution managed the incidents, and the pattern assembled in the external account, and the external account is the one that history records. Princess Pushy, Rent-a-Kents, perfectly ghastly, the brooch, the sheep, the restaurant. That is the external account. The institution's management produced it by not naming it. Now the 3 reigns. George VI built the machine that absorbed her. He did not know he was building it for her. He was building the machine for the institution, the machine that manages the minor royals and the adjacent figures, and the complicated people who exist in the orbit of the working senior royals, without being working senior royals themselves. He built the machine. The machine was running when she arrived. Elizabeth ran the machine for 44 years with Princess Michael inside it. She paid the £120,000 a year. She received her at the family occasions. She absorbed the SS Father and the Ward Hunt affair, and the convenient womb, and the New York restaurant, and the brooch and the sheep. She called her a Valkyrie to Lord Mountbatten. She kept paying the rent. She never produced the scene. Elizabeth was queen for 70 years. She managed more complicated things than Princess Michael of Kent. The abdication crisis's aftermath, the annus horribilis, Diana's death, the Sussex departure. Princess Michael was one item on a long list of items that the 70-year reign required the managing of. She was managed with the same specific competence that the other items were managed with. She was absorbed. She stayed. Charles inherited the machine. He had coined the Rent-a-Kents. He had watched 44 years of his mother's management. He suggested the Frogmore move. The Kents did not move. The machine continues to run under Charles because the machine is the machine, and the Kents are still in the apartment, and the scene is still worse than the cost. 3 reigns, 1 machine, 1 apartment, 1 woman who arrived in 1978 and has not been moved. What does the title mean? What does untouchable mean in the honest verdict? It means this: she was not untouchable because she was protected. Nobody was protecting her in the sense of the deliberate shield organized around the person who is being deliberately protected. Princess Anne was not protecting her when she called her Princess Pushy. Charles was not protecting her when he called them the Rent-a-Kents. Linley was not protecting her when he said dinner with Princess Michael was what he would wish on his worst enemy. She was untouchable because the specific mechanism for touching her did not exist in the form that the touching would have required. The mechanism would have been the scene. The scene would have been worse than the cost, so the mechanism was never deployed. The untouchability is the gap between the thing that needed to be done and the cost of doing it. The gap was too wide. It stayed too wide for 47 years. The cost of the management filled the gap year by year. The scene remained worse than the cost. The gap remained open, and she remained in apartment 10, in the gap. She is still there, bedridden now. The close relatives nearby, the representative not commenting, the walled garden outside the window. Nobody moved her, not in 3 reigns, not in 47 years. Not with the SS Father, or the convenient womb, or the New York restaurant, or the brooch, or the sheep, or the sting. Not with the Public Accounts Committee, or the House of Commons, or the disappointed, or the very sorry, or the 3 sentences every time. She arrived in 1978 as the 6-foot Valkyrie from Karlovy Vary. The Queen called her that, Valkyrie, to Lord Mountbatten, the Norse warrior goddess who rides into battle and chooses who lives and who dies, and who is formidable and fierce and somewhat terrifying. She chose to stay. For 47 years, she chose to stay. The institution chose to absorb. For 47 years, it chose to absorb. The two choices met. They produced the 47 years. They produced the record. They produced the verdict. The verdict is this: she was untouchable because the institution that could have touched her decided every year for 47 years that the touching was worse than the cost of not touching. And she made herself impossible to touch by simply staying. That is the honest verdict. Apartment 10, Kensington Palace, 2026. She has been here since 1981. 45 years in the same rooms. The 5 bedrooms and the 5 reception rooms, and the walled garden outside that she calls her open-air drawing room. The mustard-toned walls and the inherited furniture from Princess Marina, Prince Michael's mother, the beautiful Greek princess who died in 1968 and left her son the contents of her apartment and the specific quality of the continental European aesthetic that the contents carried. The apartment looks like the 18th century. She said she lived there in her mind. The apartment is the physical expression of the mind she described. The tapestries and the antiques and the specific decoration of the person who has organized every available surface around the expression of the belief that she inhabits a different era from the one the calendar describes. She is in the bedroom now. The walled garden is outside, empty of the 150 guests and the Indian Raj-style tent and the champagne and the canapés and the portrait of Prince Michael on the easel. The garden that she called her open-air drawing room is the garden that is not drawing room anything right now. It is the garden outside the bedroom window of the woman who is bedridden with the marked decline and the stroke and the close relatives nearby. Prince Michael is 83. He was a page boy at the Queen's wedding in 1952. He is in the apartment. The consultancy is on the website. The South Korean gold company is not. He is 83, and he is in the apartment, and his wife is in the bedroom, and the walled garden is outside. Frederick is in Los Angeles, with Sophie Winkleman, and Maud, and Isabella. He is 46 years old. He is a banker. He is the son of Princess Michael of Kent, who grew up in this apartment, and who admitted the cocaine in the Sunday Times in 1999, and whose mother said, "I believe him," and who moved to Los Angeles. Los Angeles is a specific distance from apartment 10 at Kensington Palace. Gabriella is 44. She lost Thomas Kingston in February 2024. He was 45. He was a lovely man, so kind and thoughtful. We never had an inkling. She is the daughter of Princess Michael of Kent, who grew up in this apartment, and who married at St. George's Chapel, Windsor, in May 2019, with the Queen attending, and who is now the widow at 44. The apartment has held all of this. The Ward Hunt affair, and the red wig, and the News of the World headline, and the convenient womb, and the SS father's friendship with Goering, and the plagiarism settlement, and the New York restaurant, and the brooch, and the sheep, and the sting, and the broken wrists, and the Christmas lunch in splints. All of it happened to the people who live in this apartment, or was produced by the people who live in this apartment. The apartment absorbed it the same way the institution absorbed it. Quietly, without the scene. She has 6 books on the shelf. Crowned in a Far Country, The Serpent and the Moon, Cupid and the King, the 3 Eugenius novels. A Cheetah's Tale, the autobiographical account of her time in Mozambique, published in 2017 when she was 72 years old. 6 books about European women who wielded power from the adjacent position. 6 books that are also, in the way that all her books are also about her, the autobiography she never wrote directly. The autobiography she never wrote directly is this account. The account that the 47 years have assembled from the outside of the apartment that she assembled from the inside. She has a cheetah conservation charity. She is an international royal patron of the Cheetah Conservation Fund in Namibia. The cheetah, the fastest land animal. The animal that is built for the sprint, for the acceleration from stillness to 70 miles per hour in 3 seconds, and that cannot sustain the sprint for long, and that rests after the sprint in the specific way that the animal whose entire system has been organized around the sprint rests when the sprint is over. She is resting now. Not from choice, from the stroke and the marked decline and the close relatives and the representative not commenting, but she is resting in the apartment where she has been since 1981, in the specific form of the person who is at the end of the sprint, and who is in the place she chose to be when she chose to be anywhere. She chose to be here. In 1978, she chose to be here, and she has been here since, and she has been choosing every year to stay here, in the form that the staying takes, when the staying is the refusal to be moved by the institution that was absorbing her, and by the people who were calling her Princess Pushy, and Rent-a-Kents, and perfectly ghastly, and what I would wish on my worst enemy. She stayed. She refused to be moved. Nobody moved her. The institution absorbed. The courtiers managed. The 3 sentences were issued every time. The scene was always worse than the cost. She outlasted 3 monarchs. George VI died in 1952, 26 years before she arrived. Elizabeth died in 2022, 44 years after she arrived. Charles is king. She is still in the apartment. She outlasted Diana. Diana died in 1997. Princess Michael is in apartment 10 in 2026. The woman she described as a convenient womb died in the Pont de l'Alma tunnel in Paris in August 1997. Princess Michael is in apartment 10 in 2026. She outlasted the Ward Hunt affair and the convenient womb and the SS father story and the New York restaurant and the plagiarism settlement and the brooch and the sheep and the sting and the broken wrists. She has not outlasted the stroke, not yet. The stroke is the current condition. The marked decline is the current condition. The bedridden is the current condition. But she attended the Christmas lunch with both wrists in splints in December 2024. Both wrists in splints. She got in the car and went to Buckingham Palace. That is the last public image. Both wrists in splints. Christmas lunch. She attended. The Valkyrie who the Queen described to Lord Mountbatten in 1978. The Norse warrior goddess who rides into battle and chooses who lives and who dies. She rode into the British royal family in 1978, and she chose to stay, and she stayed for 47 years, through everything that 47 years produced, and she attended the Christmas lunch with both wrists in splints in December 2024. Princess Anne called her Princess Pushy. She was. She pushed through the SS father and the Ward Hunt affair and the red wig and the convenient womb and the New York restaurant and the brooch and the sheep and the sting and the £4.9 million and the 3 sentences every time and the 3 reigns of courtiers who paid the price. She pushed through all of it. She pushed through the broken wrists to the Christmas lunch. Nobody moved her. The walled garden is outside the window. The bedroom is quiet. The close relatives are nearby. The representative is not commenting on private medical matters. She arrived in 1978. She is in apartment 10 in 2026. 47 years. 1 apartment. 3 reigns. Still there.